Chapter 561, The Second Sight. Saul hadn't even finished speaking when Monty on the opposite side suddenly leapt up. A pair of fleshy wings burst out from his back, their span instantly exceeding the diameter of the circular platform. With a fierce snap, those wings slammed together, propelling him straight across the platform to attack Saul directly. Saul's expression grew solemn. He knew that pulling a second-rank wizard into his own mental battlefield was an extremely dangerous move, because there was no way for him to determine whether his enemy also possessed extraordinary spiritual power. Monty before him was clearly skilled in this domain. He not only immediately grasped the situation he was in, but also turned the tables in the very next moment, launching a proactive assault. As the massive flesh wings neared Saul, they transformed again, the tips becoming as sharp as blades. Saul raised his arms, which instantly morphed into two round shields at the moment of impact. Seeing Saul actually attempt to block his attack head-on, a trace of disdain flashed in Monty's eyes. But in the next instant, blade met shield, and the entire mental space let out a heavy, mournful wail. The flesh wings were blasted back, while the steel shields were merely dented. Impossible. This time, Monty was truly shocked. A first-rank wizard, how could he possibly possess spiritual power on par with a second rank? He could no longer maintain his composure. Another pair of wings sprouted from his back. But this pair was not as perfectly shaped as the first. It was as though a mutation had occurred, resulting in a pair of malformed wings. The twisted flesh wings were covered in tiny branching protrusions, like infant hands that extended and retracted with eerie motion. The two pairs of wings swept toward Saul again, the gusts they stirred up reeking with a foul stench. This time, Saul didn't try to take the hit. The moment he saw those malformed wings, he immediately sensed the dreadful, warping contagion emanating from them. It was like a plague. He hurriedly flew into the air to evade them. However, the twisted power on those wings didn't seem to require direct contact to spread. Just a few glances at them made Saul's eyes sting and water, as if a dozen eyelashes had embedded themselves into his eyes, impossible to remove. Saul shut his eyes tightly and instantly lost all visual perception of the outside world. Monty's heart leapt with delight. With a pair of normal flesh wings, he launched relentless attacks at the airborne Saul, pinning him down and blinding him to the changes around him. At the same time, a long, thin tail sprouted from his back and crept silently through the storm-like assault, inching closer and closer to the back of Saul's neck. But a silver butterfly, appearing to be made of twisted metal threads, floated gently onto the sneaking tail. Then came the crisp voice of a young girl. "Brother Saul, he's trying to sneak up on you." Still focused on blocking the fleshwing assaults, Saul instantly became alert. He jerked backward just in time, causing Monty's sharp tail to strike nothing but air. "You actually dare to cultivate another consciousness within your mental form." Monty was both astonished and envious. Then his surprise twisted into resentment. How could this be something a first-rank wizard was capable of? Even third-rank wizards didn't have such a setup. "I have to finish off this brat quickly. If not, my body outside really might get killed by those termites." Monty was growing desperate. He no longer concealed his murderous intent, and relying on Saul's temporary blindness, launched a fierce, high-speed barrage of attacks. Even with Penny's reminders from above and Saul's efforts to defend himself, wounds gradually began to appear on his mental form. Losing his sight was just too much of a handicap. "Even if I grow eyes on other parts of my body, it won't help. Monty's warped corruption targets visual perception itself, unless I somehow had a second set of vision." At this thought, a sudden spark lit up in Saul's mind. But just then, he was once again blasted backward by the wings. After retreating a few steps, he was suddenly caught, trapped between the waiting flesh wings from behind. The wings curled inward, instantly sealing off all movement in front, behind, below, and to the sides. And from above, a sharp tail came plummeting like a spear from the heavens. That tail moved with such speed that it let out a screeching whistle as it tore through the air within Saul's mental space. It seemed utterly impossible for Saul to dodge this fatal strike, but at the very last moment, he suddenly looked up, seemingly intending to take the attack head-on with his face. And in that instant he raised his head, his cheeks, forehead, neck, the backs of his hands. All the skin exposed outside his clothes began to boil like scalding water, erupting with one eerie eye after another. As these eyes emerged, they all snapped open, staring directly at Monty. Each of them had multicolored pupils, and the moment they appeared, Monty's entire body went rigid. Monty stared into those colorful eyes, his mind going completely blank, forgetting his situation. And those eyes on Saul's skin were still multiplying, splitting, enlarging, splitting again, expanding again. Saul's entire body was suddenly covered in a dense layer of eyes. Monty, frozen in place, was struck by a fear that pierced straight to his soul. And it wasn't just Monty. Penny, upon seeing the eyes all over Saul's body, let out a shriek and scrambled back into the diary, tumbling and flailing as she went. She didn't dare show herself again. Only Saul seemed unaware of his own abnormal state. He noticed Monty's sharp tail was just half a meter away from him, and immediately twisted and turned, slipping out through a narrow crevice. As he moved, the eyeballs on his body rubbed against each other, producing a strange glug-glug sound. But the situation was urgent, and Saul didn't notice. He had merely tried to imitate the feeling of twinkling stars in the night sky, attempting to add a layer of vision to himself. He hadn't expected it to succeed on the first try. However, the sensation of this new vision was rather strange, like switching to a god's eye view. He could see in all directions, above, below, left, right, front, and back. And yet, his own figure was absent from all these perspectives, as if the eyes themselves were avoiding something. Saul didn't have time to adjust. He could only force himself to focus on Monty. Why did Monty suddenly stop moving? The thought flickered through his mind but was quickly replaced by another. I need to buy time. Monty's mental strength was formidable. He finally broke free from the frozen state, even though he had never seen anything like Saul's current form. He knew very well that the young wizard before him had entered an extremely dangerous state. He couldn't allow the transformation to continue. Screw it, Monty thought. His body began to shift form again. Freely changing the form of a soul body was extremely dangerous. At first, Monty only dared to make changes he was confident in. But seeing Saul practically becoming something inhuman, and with no idea what state the second-rank humpback termite outside was in, Monty could no longer afford to hesitate if he wanted to survive. His fleshy wings and tail trembled twice, the surface becoming smooth and hard. His movements grew even faster. Saul had just escaped the assault of the wings when he saw the tail lash toward him from behind, a mere blur. Danger, I have to block it. All the eyeballs on his back swiveled to focus on the incoming sharp tail. The eyeballs on his arms contracted and squeezed, bending his limbs backward. With a stretch of his hand, he actually managed to catch the tail, its trajectory nearly impossible to trace. Only then did Saul notice something strange about the hand gripping the tail. But before he could get a good look, the tail in his hand suddenly shattered into dozens of fragments. Saul's first instinct was that Monty had once again changed the form of his attack, but just as he went on alert, he noticed that Monty's entire body was beginning to fracture and disintegrate. The eyeballs in front of Saul clearly saw Monty's expression shift from confusion to panic and finally to hatred. But at that point, Monty could do nothing. With a crash, he shattered into countless fragments, drifting through the air. His body in the outside world was dead. And so, the sole body within the platform could no longer exist either. Perhaps some lingering obsession remained, because the fragments in front of Saul paused briefly, then began to drift toward him. But before they could reach Saul, the red hardcover book above his head slowly opened, drawing in all the fragments completely. Then the book shrank, dropping gently into Saul's hand. Saul noticed that the book now contained half a black page. Why only half a page? Chapter 562, Blood Red Performance. Monty's originally complete consciousness body had ultimately only provided half a black page. He couldn't even communicate anymore. Saul, worried about his body in the outside world, didn't hesitate any longer and exited the mental realm immediately. When he opened his eyes, he saw little Algie carrying him, sprinting madly across the rooftops of the settlement. Beside him was Herman, whose upper body was the only part still mobile. One arm was holding Saul's legs, and the other gripped a tendril of little Algie, moving together with them. Dozens of meters behind them, that massive second-rank termite was rapidly closing in. In its mouth, it was still chewing on one of Monty's hands. What's going on? It's still not working. Saul immediately accelerated his flight, shooting forward even faster with little Algie's propulsion. Herman shouted anxiously from the side. It had already reacted at the beginning, but after the termite ate Monty's body, the magic fluctuations on its body became stronger again, and there were even signs of promotion. Saul glanced back at the termite, whose carapace was now sharper and more menacing. He could tell it was already entering the final breakthrough stage. If it devoured him too, it might really succeed in evolving. "How much candle left?" Saul asked quickly. "Just the last stub now. It doesn't seem very interested in the candle anymore. The chunk we tossed out earlier only made it hesitate briefly. It didn't go for it. We're a much tastier lure now." "Give me the last candle," Saul said, holding out his hand. Without hesitation, Herman handed over the final stub of candle, barely 2 centimeters long. Saul clutched the candle in his palm for a moment, then raised his hand and flung it toward the termite's mouth. Faced with such an easy snack, the termite didn't hesitate this time. It opened its jaws and swallowed it, along with Monty's arm. Seizing the moment, Saul accelerated again, rushing straight toward his final destination, the Pandading. At a glance, he saw the collapsed Pandading and the exposed basement beneath it. Without missing a beat, he stuffed Herman back into the diary and dove down headfirst. In the basement lay several narrow-neck bottles, some toppled, each filled with a pale yellow liquid. By now, the termite had caught up once again. Saul jumped into the basement and grabbed one of the bottles. As soon as he opened it, an extremely pungent smell hit his nose. It was like a mix of mint, menthol balm, and mustard. The burning sting seared his nasal passages. His brain felt like it had been set ablaze. He immediately held his breath and even formed a skin-tight mage's barrier over his body. Then, concentrating, he conjured a drop of his own magic-infused liquid into the bottle and corked it again. Behind him, the termite dropped from above, lunging at him. Saul flung the bottle at the termite mid-roll and triggered the explosion midair. A nauseating stench filled the basement instantly, but instead of continuing its attack, the termite suddenly grew interested in the contents of the bottle. It paused, lowered its head, and began sucking at the spilled liquid on the floor. Still wrapped in his protective barrier, Saul seized the opportunity and leapt up in a few quick bounds, returning to the shattered upper rooftop of the Pandading. Just then, a voice sounded behind him. "Took a bit longer than I expected." Kismet had appeared from who knows where, sauntering up beside Saul and also gazing down at the feasting termite below. This termite acid is what worker termites normally mix with food to feed the queen. Though this one isn't a queen yet, once it needs to reproduce, it can transition into one at any time. Tusk, it's close to evolving now. A third-rank humpback termite. Once it becomes a queen, it'll be a genuine bitch. Saul didn't respond to Kismet, his eyes still fixed intently on the feeding termite. Kismet turned toward him, puzzled. "My dear master, little brother, why aren't you running yet? Shouldn't you be cracking the barrier formation now? Or are you planning to serve yourself up as the next course for bitch? Saul, however, remained calm. There's no need to run anymore. Kismet's smile carried a hint of suspicion. He glanced down again at the termite below and gradually noticed something strange. The termite had already licked clean the liquid spilled on the ground, but it hadn't resumed its chase. It lay sprawled on the ground, its entire body twisting in unnatural ways. The hard carapace was growing thicker and larger. However, the newly formed carapace clashed with the old one, either pressing directly against it or sliding through the gaps into its flesh, turning from a protective shell into piercing bone spurs that harmed its body. The termite's body was growing rapidly, but the growth was utterly warped. Its limbs bent inward, while its head twisted upward. Its massive body compressed itself into a knot, producing a constant, grating krrrk 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 sound. Soon, even its internal organs were being squeezed out by the abnormal growth of carapace and limbs. With a loud splatter, its swollen abdomen burst open, oozing black and white fluids across the ground. Saul's face remained indifferent, but inwardly he let out a deep sigh of relief. Then, glancing sideways at the stunned Kismet, he said, "Once I confirmed it was interested in the candle made with termite acid, I laced a stronger termite acid solution with a little something and offered it a treat." Saul looked down again, calmly watching the death of a second-rank demonic creature. This humpback termite wasn't born naturally. I noticed it doesn't even have a stable mental form. Which was why the diary warned Saul it couldn't be dragged into the mental realm and destroyed. It would be like trying to lift tofu with a thread, impossible. Just like that boy who had feigned death and fled, this thing had also been forcibly accelerated. Even if it did ascend to third rank, it would soon collapse. Because in the borderland, where pollution was everywhere, it simply wouldn't survive. Who knew if that Monty knew this? At that moment, the termite's already swollen and deformed head suddenly exploded. Shards of its shell scattered across the ground, and within it, barely any soft tissue remained. Clearly, the rapid growth had drained all of its inner nutrients. Though its 6 legs still twitched slightly, Saul could already see it. This humpback termite, once full of potential to ascend to third rank, was well and truly dead. Without hesitation, Saul summoned Black Blade. With a few sharp slices, he cleanly severed the only intact and stable part, the termite wings, and stored them in his container. At this point, the look of shock in Kismet's eyes had turned into admiration. He stared at Saul without blinking, slapped his forehead, and exclaimed with a laugh, "You're by far my favorite master so far. Please allow me to offer you a song, Tilda." "Can I pick the song myself?" Saul turned and smiled. "Of course, though I don't know many." Saul approached him, just as Kismet waited expectantly. Suddenly, Saul threw a punch. Boom! Buffy! Kismet took a solid blow to the face from Saul's fist, charged with dark element force. The skin at the corner of his mouth split open, and blood trickled down his chin, staining his robe. Your cry of pain sounded pretty nice. With that, Saul turned and leapt into the basement. Kismet gently touched the left side of his face, which had started to swell. He could have easily healed the wound, or even dodged that punch entirely. But he knew, when you really pissed someone off, sometimes you just had to let them vent. From behind his back, Kismet drew his harp. With his other hand, he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and carefully smeared it across the strings. With the accompaniment of his own blood, he began to play. Chapter 563, Termite Trail. The ethereal tones of a harp, laden with sorrow, echoed above the settlement. In the distance, the controlled wizards and apprentices gradually regained clarity. Recalling their recent ordeals, coupled with the severed limbs around them and the barrier overhead, panic set in. They fled in all directions. The termites on the ground did not attack them. In their minds, these wizards and apprentices were food for the termite queen. But now, they could no longer sense her presence. Thus, they ceased their attacks on ordinary people, wandering aimlessly before burrowing back into the earth. Yet at this point, whether wizards or commoners, very few remained alive. Late at night, after a brief uproar, silence returned to the settlement. Only the harp's sorrowful melody continued throughout the night. By dawn, a group of wizards finally worked together to dismantle the magical barrier that had trapped them. Saul, cloaked and concealed, blended into the crowd and fled with them. Once they had escaped the settlement-turned death trap, Saul slipped away from the others and disappeared into the forest. Seeing no one nearby, Penny finally emerged. "Brother Saul, you beat him up and ran. Were you afraid he'd come after you?" Saul cast a glance at the little butterfly who had already been hunted by Kismet once. "I've been wanting to punch him for a long time." Even now, Saul couldn't figure out what Kismet's true intentions were. Agu, with broader insight, could at least understand why Saul had acted. "Agu, that man said the termite scheme had nothing to do with him, but I doubt that's true." Saul sneered. More than just unrelated, he was the one who started it. He'd already used countless lives to raise a magical pet. Kismet had done it once at Ralph Manor. Later, in his pursuit of the nightmare butterfly, he'd lured commoners and wizards alike into Grind Sail Town, which had been cursed with a Bloodsea curse. In short, this was a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals, no matter the cost or the casualties. The most frightening thing was, no one knew what those goals actually were. I even suspect that the method Monty found for making soul-reading candles and the technique that let Dolly nurture a termite queen in her womb were both his ideas, Saul said coldly, without a shred of sympathy for either of them. At this point, Morden spoke up. "Morden, that great shaman and that lady, they're both true wizards, yet they're mimicking the methods of savages. Brainless degenerates." "Herman, Sr., what do you mean? How are they copying savages?" "Morden, wizard power comes from within knowledge and self, but they tried to use the evolution of other magical creatures to force their own advancement. That's a sure path to backlash." Agu sighed. "Agu, maybe they were just desperate, stuck for too long without a breakthrough." The difficulty of advancement left Morden and Herman silent. What wizard hadn't been stuck at some stage, feeling like death would be easier? In the end, they began to doubt themselves, doubt their path, even doubt the world. Saul, however, couldn't relate at all. By now, he had reached the place deep in the woods where Monty had kept the humpback termites. The wizards who had once guarded this spot had clearly noticed the chaos in the settlement. They were long gone. Inside the 7 so-called meat nests, ordinary people used as hosts had all perished. Clearly, the termites here had turned on them as well. Back in the underground chamber of the Pandiding, Saul had found not only bottles of soul-reading candle paste, but also a number of well-hidden scrolls. After beating up Kismet, he'd leapt into the basement and stashed the items he hadn't had time to take earlier into his storage device. Among those precious magical scrolls, Saul had found something else. It was this item that had kept him from leaving the settlement right away, and instead led him into the forest. It was a sealed, tiny white termite. But not a humpback termite, this was a quicksand termite. and having cared for a quicksand termite queen before in the wizard tower, Saul immediately recognized it. This was a queen candidate. In other words, if the termite colony's reigning queen died, this one could immediately take over to ensure the species' survival. But as long as the reigning queen was still alive and nearby, it would remain dormant. Smaller than regular termites, it could enter a state of suspended animation at will, reducing its need for nutrients and allowing more resources to go to the queen. Upon seeing this termite, Saul immediately understood. There must still be a quicksand termite queen colony somewhere near the settlement. Deeper in the forest, Saul broke the magical seal on the termite, then bent down and gently dropped it onto the ground. At first, it aimlessly scurried in circles like a headless fly. Then, sensing something, it began moving in a clear direction. Little algae followed it. Little algae dropped to the ground and vanished instantly. As a magical creature of the earth element, tracking a termite underground was easy. Saul was just about to follow when he suddenly sensed a surge of wild magic behind him. No, not just magic, but a magic storm. He spun around and saw, in the direction of the settlement, a tornado of raging magical energy. At first Saul was shocked, then he quickly calmed down. So this was all to generate a page, he muttered, eyes drifting toward the mental diary within him, where a new page was about to form. But there was no excitement. He could feel that Kismet's goal in gathering the diary pages wasn't about him. The storm of chaotic magic didn't last long. Standing atop the ruins of the Pandading, Kismet extended a hand. A white page began to form at his fingertip. He looked faintly disappointed. So it's still too hard to make a gold page. Maybe if that humpback termite had reached rank 3. The white page vanished instantly. Kismet wasn't surprised. The diary's true owner was nearby. The new page would naturally seek them, not him. He rested his chin on the top of his harp. The wound on his face had vanished, but blood still stained the strings. To make a gold page, I'll need more than a puny settlement. Time for something big. I wonder when that wind sprite will finally make a move. Far from the forest stood a sheer cliff wall. It was riddled with holes, dense, disturbing cavities. At its highest point lived one of the 3 rank 3 beings of the borderland. The wind sprite. In a spacious cave deep inside the narrow, maze-like tunnels sat a stunning woman. Her slightly upturned eyes gave her enchanting face a sharp, dangerous edge. Though she lounged lazily in her chair, her mere presence made the attendants around her visibly uneasy. She hadn't moved a muscle in 3 days, locked in silent thought. Finally, the silence was broken. A guard in warrior garb entered and knelt on one knee. Lady Wind Sprite, Monty the Wizard's termite plan has failed. Chapter 564, A Bountiful Harvest. The woman finally moved her eyes and slowly turned her head toward the person who had entered to report the news. Not surprising. Back when I found out he was raising parasitic monsters, I knew he wouldn't make it. 3rd rank, that's not something you can reach so easily. After speaking, the wind sprite fell still again, like a frozen video buffering on a bad signal. The guard kneeling on the floor didn't dare to speak up, nor did he dare to move. The last person who spoke while the wind sprite was in a daze had been hanging on the peak that pierced the clouds for 3 months now. Several more minutes passed before the wind sprite spoke again. All of you leave, I want to rest. The attendant standing by and the servant who had delivered the message exchanged glances, then quietly and carefully left the room, making the slightest movements possible. After everyone else had left, a ceramic water jar in the corner of the room began to bubble and gurgle. A moment later, a human head made entirely of water emerged from the jar. "My lady, did you summon me? How's the situation at the Purity Wizard Tower?" No one has returned. The target seems to have some skill. Hey, killing the person you sent, that counts as some skill. The pollution among the halfling caravans has indeed been greatly reduced. The wind sprite closed her eyes briefly. Send someone sincere to treat the pollution. Until then, don't let any of those other rabble approach that wizard tower. Understood, my lady. One of the waterhead's words came out slurred, the pronunciation unclear. But the wind sprite immediately cast a sideways glare in that direction. As if even without hearing it clearly, she already knew what he meant. Get out, she paused, then spat out the word softly. With a splash, the water head vanished, leaving a few droplets clinging to the rim of the jar. The wind sprite slowly closed her eyes again and fell still once more. She looked like a sculpture of a beautiful woman carved by a master, not a trace of life emanating from her. Saul wandered through the forest, searching from nightfall until dawn. But strangely, although the backup queen of the quicksand termites kept seeking signs of a colony and even appeared to have found some clues, in the end, she just kept circling within the forest. Even little Algae, who scouted deep underground, still didn't find a single nest. It seemed as though all the land here had already been taken over by the humpback termites. Quicksand termites and humpback termites share many habits, but that also makes them mortal enemies, Saul muttered, watching the backup queen repeatedly fail to find the colony. He couldn't help but feel uneasy. Agu, could it be that the quicksand termites migrated recently, and because this backup queen was sealed by a wizard, she hasn't undergone the transformation yet? Herman was a bit confused. Even if the colony moved, can't we just nurture this backup queen and turn her into a real queen? It's not that simple. Saul halted, motioning for little Algae to retrieve the backup queen, who was scurrying wildly across the ground. He was already convinced by Agu's speculation. Quicksand termites are rare, and the success rate of transforming a backup queen into a true queen is very low. Though he didn't have much confidence in the backup queen successfully transforming, Saul still carefully stored her away, taking care not to harm her. If this search ended in failure, he'd have no choice but to try and raise the backup queen into maturity. Otherwise, who knew when the next rumor of quicksand termites would surface? Saul passed through the forest and emerged on the other side. He still hadn't found the quicksand termite colony, but he had seen plenty of humpback termites fighting in swarms. Clearly, the death of their queen had thrown the powerful humpback termites into disarray, each faction now acting independently. The transformation rate for humpback termite backup queens is pretty high. No wonder the forest is in such chaos. Saul shook his head and stood at the edge of the woods. It was time to go back. Before heading back, he still had to thoroughly inspect the few scrolls he had snuck out of the underground palace. Earlier, he had rushed out, then spent the whole night searching for the quicksand termite. Only now did he finally have time to see what good stuff he'd actually looted. Saul unrolled the first scroll, and it was a good one. A third-rank spell, Corrosive Breath. Although the range of this spell wasn't great, the corrosive effect it carried could cause sustained damage afterward. However, Corrosive Breath leaned toward the water element, which Saul wasn't very adept with, making it quite difficult for him to learn. He placed the scroll back into his pack and took out the second one. The second scroll was even more powerful. It was a fourth-rank spell, Wall of Toxic Miasma. Saul couldn't even begin to learn it at his current level. This spell must be related to the magical formations embedded in the settlement's outer walls. Because its area of effect is enlarged, its killing power is somewhat reduced, and it's not too hard to break either. Moreover, Wall of Toxic Miasma was poison element based, which likewise didn't suit Saul. However, he could use it to trade with other wizards for a different fourth-rank spell. I've already got 3 spells I can't learn for now, but I've never tried trading with other wizards. When I get back, I should ask the old witch if there are any exchange meetings like that. Saul stored away the second scroll that he couldn't use for now. Only one left. It felt just like drawing cards. He gripped the scroll with both hands and gave it a sharp snap open. When he saw the writing on it, his brow furrowed at first, then a smile slowly spread across his face. Finally hit a super rare. Seeing Saul's reaction, everyone in the diary grew curious. What exactly was written in this scroll? Saul didn't keep it to himself. He showed everyone in the diary what he saw. Agu, is this the method for extracting termite acid through the human body? Herman, the Monty extraction method. Looks like he had a lot of faith in this plan if he went and named it after himself. Penny, always eager for chaos, chimed in. Brother Saul, are you gonna raise a third-rank termite too? Sounds fun. What if we raised a third-rank butterfly instead? I already said this thing is completely pointless, and there's no way you'd reach third rank using that method anyway. Saul casually shut down Penny's suggestion. The reason I want this extraction method has nothing to do with extracting acid from humpback termites. The method itself is excellent, but it was used on completely the wrong subject. To be honest, this extraction method was more valuable in Saul's eyes than even that fourth-rank spell scroll, because the technique could be applied in many areas, even in his future research. This extraction method has its own built-in filtration function. Now all I need is the quicksand termite. Too bad all I have is this backup termite queen, and I'm not even sure she'll survive. If the quicksand termites can be cultivated, then my magic reservoir will finally begin to take shape. The only thing left will be finding a proper meat nest, or better to call it a vessel. This backup queen can't be stored too long either, otherwise her chances of survival will drop. I'll search for one more day. If I still can't find one, I'll head straight back to the wizard tower and start cultivating a new queen. Just as Saul made up his mind, he suddenly sensed someone spying on him from ahead. Looking up, he saw a familiar face, sneaking behind a large tree. It was the same boy he had saved earlier. Why are you still here? Saul called him over. Well, it doesn't matter. The settlement was destroyed, but your father's probably still alive. You don't have to sneak around anymore, and you don't need to worry about getting turned into a meat nest. Though living in the borderlands still isn't what I'd call safe. The boy shuffled over slowly, clearly terrified, but still gathered the courage to say to Saul, I figured it out, sir. Thank you. Before Saul could explain that this really had nothing to do with him, the boy continued, You're looking for another kind of termite, right? I know where they are. Chapter 565, Hookbite Fish. The most important piece of the puzzle was found in the most unexpected place, by someone who originally had nothing to do with it. Who would have thought that a group of quicksand termites, driven out by another species, would end up settling in the trees? Saul carefully collected every quicksand termite he could find, only then moving the queen, who had become extremely emaciated from malnutrition, and the alternate queen in Saul's hand, upon reuniting with the actual queen, immediately transferred her stored nutrients to the queen, then fell into a deep slumber. Seeing this, Saul was briefly dazed, only snapping out of it thanks to Penny's complaint. Afterward, to thank the boy who had provided the clue, Saul prepared a bottle of mental restoration potion for him. Though the potion couldn't fully cure the boy's mental degradation, it could at least keep him in decent health for a few more years. For a longer life, the only path would be for him to become a wizard apprentice, but with his current mental state, that was impossible. It was a vicious cycle. In the end, Saul also gave the boy some money, not enough to attract envy, but enough to slightly improve his life ahead. The boy was clever. He didn't think Saul had given him too little. On the contrary, he understood Saul's intent immediately and sincerely thanked him. As Saul bid farewell to the boy for the second time, he watched the child run toward the settlement to reunite with his father and couldn't help but sigh. Ordinary people living in extraordinary places. They might not even know if they'll open their eyes the next morning. Penny giggled. Since Brother Saul thinks he's a good kid, why not bring him back as a page? Steward Hope is all alone. He's got to do everything himself. Purdy Wizard Tower isn't a good place for ordinary people, Saul replied. He didn't think the place he lived in was any kind of sanctuary. With fruitful rewards in hand, he began his journey home. Saul had been away from the Purity Wizard Tower for half a month. Upon returning, he rubbed his eyes, wondering if he had come to the wrong place. The perimeter of Lake Rhine had been planted with 2 full circles of mushrooms. Each mushroom was half a person tall and as thick as a man, sturdy enough to look like a row of little stools. No doubt about it, they had to be Marsh's doing. Ever since arriving at Lake Rhine, Saul rarely left the island, and when he did, he usually didn't need a vehicle. So Marsh, who was supposed to be the coachman, had changed jobs to become a farmer and began growing mushrooms on part of the island to improve their diet. But space on the island was limited, and the white mushrooms were hardy growers. Before long, Marsh had run out of farming room again. Before Saul had left this time, he had seen Marsh squatting by the lake every day, deep in thought. And now, coming back, Saul was greeted by a mushroom wall. Just as he was curiously stepping forward to inspect it, Marsh popped out from behind a row of mushrooms. "Lord Saul, you're back." He grinned sheepishly, holding a few grayish-white mushrooms still covered in soil. Saul took one from Marsh's hand with a smile. "These mushrooms can grow this big." MHM, Marsh nodded enthusiastically. "They can grow even bigger. Don't look down on them. They're actually quite useful when grown properly." Saul handed the mushroom back to Marsh and knocked on one of the towering mushrooms. Though it looked soft, it was surprisingly tough and resilient. If they could grow even taller and larger, they might genuinely serve as a kind of protective wall. Though they could only block physical force, they were no use against wizardry. Marsh stood by nervously as Saul tested the mushroom wall, unsure whether the Lord approved of his outdoor farming. If Saul disapproved, he'd have to tear them down overnight. The thought of the workload made him a little regretful. Maybe he should have waited until Saul returned before planting them. Still, they weren't much use against wizards, but neither were they a real hindrance. Saul patted Marsh on the shoulder. "If you want to grow them, grow them. See if you can cultivate them even bigger, just don't forget to leave a door." Marsh immediately lit up and hurried to show him. "Lord, look, there is a door." He knocked on one of the mushrooms, which immediately wilted and collapsed flat on the ground in a comical, face-down posture. "Lord, I've come to an understanding with the mushrooms. No matter where you come from, they'll always open the way for you." Saul opened his mouth but didn't quite know what to say. He forced a smile. "Then carry on. I'm heading back." Marsh cheerfully saw Saul off, brimming with excitement. Saul stepped onto the frozen surface of Lake Rhine, walking over mushrooms that were just the right amount of soft and firm. On the far side, Steward Hope approached in a wolf-drawn carriage. "Welcome home, Tower Master." In the distance, and who had stayed behind at the Wizard Tower, jumped and waved excitedly. Beside her stood the old witch, hood drawn low and face obscured, arms crossed as she leaned against the doorframe. Because their master had returned, the deathly still Wizard Tower was once again filled with vitality. Saul let out a long breath of relief. Although he had only lived here for less than a year, it was already beginning to feel like home. After returning from the ancient grove Survive, Saul began officially constructing the magic reservoir alongside Camus, while handing over the termite cultivation work to the steward, Hope. The old witch, who usually did nothing all day besides adapting to her perfect body, volunteered herself to join in the cultivation of quicksand termites. But she was someone who couldn't care for people, let alone termites. In order to stop her from further ruining the colony, Steward Hope assigned her some tasks that seemed extremely important, but were actually just flashy and meaningless. Meanwhile, as Saul built his magic reservoir, he didn't forget to improve the soul-body shielding of his various conscious projections. Time passed swiftly, and before long, another 6 months had gone by. The Borderland seasons were distinct by region. Lake Rhine had transitioned from deep winter into early winter, and clusters of gray-white mushroom forests now stood along its shores. Unlike the tightly packed mushroom groves planted along the lakeside wall, these were more like scattered woods. Beneath the towering mushroom trees were clusters of smaller mushrooms. White spores drifted in the air, seamlessly blending with the lake's mist. The weather was clear today, and the mist was thinner than usual. Having pulled an all-nighter, Saul brought out a small stool made from dehydrated mushrooms early that morning and walked out onto the lake. With a dagger, he effortlessly carved a small hole in the ice, then took out a long wooden rod and tied little algae to it. He cast the line. It hit the water. The fishing line, lacking a float, gently swayed in the lake. Saul leaned back, half-closed his eyes, and waited for the fish to bite. Lately, after intense mental exertion, Saul always chose this method to relax. While waiting for little algae to suddenly hook a soul popsicle, he would empty his mind and let himself drift into a thoughtless state. Zoning out. If life could stay this peaceful, he wouldn't even mind if his advancement took a bit longer. But peace, of course, was meant to be broken. As he waited, the outermost mushroom tree in the forest began swaying left and right. Then the second one, the third. Like someone had tapped the surface of water, the ripples spread outward. Someone was coming. Saul snapped out of his daze and turned his head to look. His body still rested lazily on the chair. 2 mushrooms near Lake Rhine toppled over, revealing 2 figures. Jiajiagu, carrying an even larger pack, waved enthusiastically at Saul. Standing beside him was a middle-aged man with no expression. His face was covered by a metallic mask, and the eyes that peeked through glowed with an eerie green, like ghost fire from a graveyard. Although magic was forbidden on Lake Rhine, mental energy was not restricted. Saul could sense that Jiajiagu had brought a second-rank wizard this time. Suddenly, the lake water began to ripple. Black, vine-like tendrils recoiled at high speed. Little algae burst from the water, its pointed head snapping upward, a human-shaped soul popsicle clenched in its mouth. Big catch on the line. Chapter 566, The Judged One. A great fish was hooked and hauled in. Saul waved his hand, sending little algae to carry it down to the basement laboratory. He himself hefted a mushroom stool and strolled toward the lakeshore. It's been a while, Jiajiagu. First he greeted an old acquaintance, then turned to a newcomer, a second-rank wizard, and bowed. Greetings. Greetings, the second-rank wizard bowed in return. Wizard Saul. Saul discreetly appraised the stranger. His robes were more elaborate and solemn, unlike the local styles of the Stat Continent. Jiajiagu hurried to introduce him. Wizard Saul, this is second-rank Wizard Justin. He's come to see you, UHUH. Jiajiagu faltered. Justin stepped in, stating his purpose plainly. I wish you to heal both my wounds and my pollution. I've done some research into purging pollution, Saul said, but you are a second-rank wizard. My methods might not meet your needs. And I'm not very adept at healing injuries. Since you're second rank, surely you excel at curative magic more than I. Saul hadn't had a patient in 6 months and wanted to retain this one, but he had to temper expectations so the client wouldn't turn hostile. Jayajia Gu's already briefed me on your abilities, Justin continued, though my case is unusual. He paused and glanced at Jayajia Gu. Jayajia Gu blinked. My lords, I'll fetch Steward Hope to transfer your supplies. Politely excusing himself, Jayajia Gu left the two alone. Justin then slowly removed his metal mask. Saul's eyes widened. The man's face was deeply hollowed inward. His nose bridge was recessed deeper than his eye sockets, as if someone had chiseled away his nose and then smashed it again with a hammer. At the deepest point of the hollowed nose were yellow-green stains. I come from Nefrit continent, Justin said evenly, and 5 years ago I entered the borderland. Technically, I fled into it. He spoke with such calm detachment it felt as though he were recounting someone else's story. I'm a wanted fugitive under a purge edict from the judging tribunal. Saul had heard of the judging tribunal, but a purge edict. He thought of Jassim, the wizard who'd killed 2 fellow wizards with a black blade before taking his own life, also from the tribunal. Noticing Saul's change in expression, Justin understood he'd heard the tribunal's name before. Don't worry that treating me will anger the tribunal. They won't set foot in the borderland. That's why I risked coming here. That statement carried weighty implications. The judging tribunal never entered the borderland. Why not? There are no barriers or checkpoints here. Apprentices and commoners alike can come and go, so long as they avoid lethal dangers. Clearly, the borderland's name wasn't just due to its pollution and deadly rules. There must be other reasons. Justin paused, giving Saul time to ponder, then continued. While fleeing, a tribunal arbiter wounded me. My metal-bodied defenses were nearly destroyed. After I entered the borderland, the local pollution ate at my wounds. For years I've tried every cure to heal myself and suppress the pollution, but my body is nearing its limit. Without further help, I fear I won't survive another year. Whether from habit or resignation, Justin remained utterly composed even as he spoke of his impending death. Saul couldn't help but admire his poise. Few could remain so calm while feeling death creeping closer. Wizard Saul, your reputation has spread throughout this region, Justin said, but frankly, few dare to seek you out for healing. Saul stroked his chin and admitted with a laugh, true. Purging pollution means exposing your own weaknesses to others. Most wouldn't risk coming to you. That's right, Saul nodded in agreement. However, working as a doctor was just a cover for him. If too many people came looking for him, it would become a nuisance. But I'm different. I've basically tried every method I could. What's left is either too dangerous or simply impossible. That's why I came to you. This is probably my last attempt. Saul did not give any promises. Can you let me see your wounds and pollution first? Sure, but I'll need some protection, Justin said calmly. Saul agreed. Without a word, Justin silently muttered an incantation. A shimmering golden liquid appeared beneath his feet. The liquid spread outward in all directions under their feet, forming an equilateral triangle. From each side, it grew diagonally upward, eventually creating a closed, regular tetrahedron. Saul observed Justin's magical energy fluctuations throughout the spell casting. He noticed that Justin's casting technique was heavy and steady, but within his energy waves lurked a subtle tremor and unease, like an anthill inside a dam, a worrying sign. Then Saul stepped forward, ready to examine Justin's injuries, but the latter suddenly turned around and sat down on the ground. Slowly, he peeled back the scalp at the back of his head. A harsh, tearing sound like ripping tape echoed. Saul forced himself to stay calm and appear professional. Justin's scalp was an artificial skin treated with magic. From the back of his head down to his neck, it was all metal. Not the metallic sheen of Kelly's skin, but truly hard, cold metal. Yet this metal, which should have been smooth and glossy, was covered in a thick layer of yellow-green grime. Irregular in shape, rough on the surface. Saul took out a glass rod and lightly swept it across, watching some fine fragments fall. He hurriedly caught them with a Petri dish. "If you don't mind, may I run some simple tests on these samples first?" "Of course." Justin raised his hand, his fingernails sharp as metallic blades, and cut off a sliver of the metal surface covered with grime for Saul. Saul noticed that beneath Justin's metal scalp was still metal, leaving uncertain whether any traditional flesh and blood remained. This newly exposed metal layer was smooth and bright, but after being exposed to air for a few seconds, it began to darken and quickly turned the familiar yellow-green color. The surface also started to roughen. Saul compared the substance in the Petri dish with the material newly growing on Justin's head. Visually, they were the same. "Looks like metal rusting," Saul said. Justin replaced his scalp and stood up, still with his back to Saul. "Yes, my major is metal element wizardry. Your description of rusting is actually very apt. Right now, I'm rapidly, continuously, repeatedly rusting. This phenomenon started at my nose and has now spread across my entire skull." When his back faced Saul, a flicker of vulnerability showed in Justin's eyes. But when he turned around, that vulnerability was completely hidden. Saul no longer stared at Justin. He lowered his head and began studying the properties of the substance in the Petri dish. He could already tell that this wizard, who appeared calm and composed on the surface, was deeply proud. Though brave enough to expose the most vulnerable part of his body, he refused to show any psychological weakness. Since that was the case, Saul naturally chose to politely avoid the topic. Chapter 567, Compromise. The metallic regular tetrahedron slowly dissolved, revealing two figures once more. Saul took the pollutant obtained from Justin and made his way to the wizard tower, while Justin remained where he was. Whether or not the condition could be treated would depend on the pathological research this time. After Saul left, Justin remained standing in the mushroom forest. Even the white mushroom spores drifting down would carefully avoid him. Saul returned to the wizard tower and brought the Petri dish in his hand to Camus. "Take a look at this sample of pollutants." Saul extracted a portion of the pollutant, divided it into several samples, added different reagents to each, and recorded the characteristics of each one. After several rounds of testing, the results were not ideal. Agu, who had only recently emerged from the diary in the past half-year, was assisting nearby. In terms of knowledge, he was probably the only one capable of keeping pace with Saul and Camus. At the moment seeing the data Saul recorded, his brows furrowed tightly. Camus's reaction was more direct. She only took a glance before handing the data back to Saul. "His injury has already fused with the pollutant and reached a state of balance. Destroying either one would cause the other to expand rapidly." What Camus noticed, Saul had naturally also seen. Agu advised, "Master, this commission is quite risky. The chance of success is very small, and if the treatment fails, this second-rank wizard may not remain as calm as he is now." Even Morden, still inside the diary, agreed that Saul should not accept the commission. Morden, "Besides, there's nothing in it for us if we succeed. We might even end up offending the tribunal. While they wouldn't send anyone into the borderland to hunt down a fugitive, it doesn't mean they're completely ignorant of what goes on here." Agu continued, "It might also attract more people who have been pursued by the tribunal. We could end up facing even more trouble." He emphasized more, because he understood that Saul's identity as a doctor was more like a protective charm. Clearly, everyone was advising Saul against treating Justin. Failure might lead to retaliation, and success might bring the wrath of an even stronger, more terrifying organization. No matter how you looked at it, it wasn't a good deal. Saul thought for a moment, then stood up, taking the test results and remaining samples, and returned to the mushroom forest outside Lake Rhine. Justin still stood exactly as he had when Saul left, as if he hadn't moved an inch the entire time. Saul handed the items in his hands to Justin. "I'm sorry." Justin looked down at what Saul was holding, the muscles in his face tightening. "You can't treat my pollution. You should be more aware of your condition than anyone. The pollution and the old injuries have become entangled, forming a delicate balance. If I break that balance without being able to completely purge the pollution, the resulting instability could shorten your remaining life to just a few days, or even a few hours. So your conclusion is to give up. Is it really because you lack confidence?" Justin's voice dropped low. "I told you the cause of the pollution in my body so you could understand the nature of the injury and the pollutant. I didn't expect you to be frightened by it." Saul did not deny it. Justin took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "Very well." He took the Petri dish and notes from Saul's hands and snorted coldly. "Since you have so many concerns, I advise you to stop calling yourself a doctor. You're not fit for it." He turned and walked a few steps before seemingly still feeling dissatisfied. He turned back and said to Saul, "I'll tell my friends you're a fraud of a doctor." "No, wait. You don't even have a reputation to tarnish. You don't even qualify as a fraud." Justin strode away, leaving behind a trail of clear footprints in the mushroom forest. When Saul returned to the lakeside, he happened upon Steward Hope and Jayajayagu waiting for him. Jayajayagu observed Saul cautiously, as if trying to read the outcome of his exchange with Justin from his expression. But Saul's face was calm, completely unreadable. Hope smiled and said, "This time, Lord Jayajayagu has brought us quite a few good things. He even got his hands on that fireflow stone you've been looking for, 20 kilograms of it." That news brought a smile to Saul's face. "Is that so? Then I'm truly grateful." He had been collecting fireflow stone for quite some time, but Jayajayagu had only ever managed to bring back small amounts each time. It wasn't that he was hoarding it. This substance was simply too rare. Yet it was crucial in fire element and metal element wizard formations, and practically irreplaceable. That made it incredibly hard to come by. Now that he had so much fireflow stone, Saul could finally improve the efficiency of the Monty extraction method by another 10%. "By the way, it's been 2 months since the third cleansing. Let me check your back again." Jayajayagu immediately set down his massive pack and exposed his back. But the result of this checkup wasn't encouraging. The pollution on Jayajayagu's back had worsened again. Though it was still better than before he met Saul, if Saul couldn't fully eradicate the pollution, the issue would continue to deteriorate. It might even lead to a retaliatory backlash. The timing is just about right. Saul thought for a moment, then took out a wooden doll from his storage device. "I understand being a traveling merchant, it's impossible for you to abandon your pack, but as long as you carry it, your pollution can't be properly resolved." Jayajayagu was well aware of his own condition. He gave a bitter smile. "Lord Saul, I don't have a choice. If I give up my pack, I lose the means to survive in the borderland. I can only trade my health for the chance to stay alive." "I know. That's why I never tried to persuade you. But recently I came up with a new idea. You can hear it out and decide if you want to try." As soon as Jayajayagu heard that, his eyes lit up. Having dealt with Saul for so long, he had a general idea of the man's abilities. Saul always managed to come up with surprising solutions. "No need to hear it, my lord. I'm willing to try," Jayajayagu said with a goofy grin. "To be honest, your solutions are always too complicated. Even if you explain, I won't get it. I'm willing to trust you." Saul didn't play coy either. After all, he was quite confident in treating Jayajayagu. "Still, before we officially begin, I need to give you a simple explanation so you can cooperate later. Saul explained that the source of the pollution on Jiajiagu's body was hidden inside the giant pack on his back, and the pollution wouldn't be removed simply by switching to another pack. Because between Jiajiagu and the pack, a causal link had already formed. It was a kind of rule-based force unique to the borderland. In a few rounds of treatment, Saul had already discovered that even if he used soul fishing to extract all the pollution from Jiajiagu, it was useless. Unless that causal link was severed, Jiajiagu would continue to suffer from a constant resurgence of pollution. But Saul had thought of a new method. At the connection point between the pack and Jiajiagu's body, he would place a substitute puppet. The doll would absorb the new pollution in place of Jiajiagu. When the puppet reached a certain threshold of contamination, Jiajiagu would need to come back to replace it, or spend a hefty sum to directly purchase the method for making the puppets. As for the creation of the puppet, the inspiration naturally came from Mentor Rum. Although Saul and Rum had ended up on opposing sides at the last moment, before turning against each other, Saul had learned quite a few useful things from him. After hearing this, Jiajiagu was overjoyed and agreed immediately. However, instead of purchasing the puppet-making method, he opted for regular replacements. That surprised Saul a little, but he didn't pry. Since the decision was made, Saul got straight to work. Treating Jiajiagu took a long time. By the time Jiajiagu, beaming with excitement, once again shouldered his pack, night had fully fallen. Because of this treatment, Saul reclaimed more than half of the magic crystals and supplies he had traded to Jiajiagu. After Jiajiagu left, he and the steward Hope began sorting through the goods from the trade. Even with the wolf cart, we'll need to make 3 trips, Hope said with guilt. It was my oversight. I should have built a transport tool with greater capacity long ago. Saul didn't mind. It's fine, take your time hauling it, I'll have little Algie keep watch here. Before he could finish speaking, Saul suddenly turned his head toward the mushroom grove. Justin, who had stormed off during the day, was now walking through the grove toward them with an expressionless face. This time, the mushroom grove, which usually served as an early warning system, showed not a single reaction. Hope immediately ducked behind Saul, then covertly used little Algie's clone to send a signal to the wizard tower. Justin was a second-rank wizard. Now that he had returned with unknown intentions, they had to summon the old witch immediately. Saul, on the other hand, remained composed. After all, behind him lay Lake Rhine. As long as he took the final step, not even a second-rank wizard could break through the anti-magic barrier over the lake's surface. Back again, Lord Justin. Didn't curse enough last time. Saul's lips curled in a slight smile, but his eyes turned cold. He had chosen not to respond to Justin's parting insults earlier in order to avoid trouble. But if the man was going to keep this up, Saul had no problem making sure that mouth stayed behind. Justin walked right up to about 3 meters in front of Saul and stopped. Then he lowered his head slightly. Wizard Saul, I know you have the ability. Please help me. I'm begging you. The moment those words left his mouth, the prideful aura that had clung to Justin collapsed completely. Chapter 568, The Notorious Tribunal. Saul didn't respond immediately. He understood how desperately someone on the verge of death could crave life, but he also understood the concerns of those within the wizard tower. Taking on greater trouble, just for the sake of a cover identity, would completely go against his original intentions. And yet, it was precisely because Justin was a fugitive from the tribunal that Saul found himself somewhat tempted. If he hadn't already rooted himself at Lake Rhine, unlike the past when he could leave whenever he wanted, he might very well have taken the job. But now he had far more to consider, and those considerations had become shackles. If the risks and rewards weren't proportional, If you think the risks outweigh the rewards, would you at least be willing to hear what I can offer in return? Justin had already humbled himself as much as he could. Saul glanced at his steward Hope, who had returned to his side. The latter merely smiled, his expression seeming to say, "Master, whatever you decide, I will support you unconditionally." And even Morden, still within the diary, didn't voice any objections. Morden, "Master, there's no need to worry about us." Penny, on the other hand, was already giving terrible ideas. "Brother Saul, see if he has anything good. If not, we can just kill him and take it." Saul's prolonged silence made Justin increasingly uneasy. Ever since he had lowered his head before Saul, he no longer tried to hide his inner emotions. "Then let's see what you have to offer. The things I want, you may not have. And even if we come to an agreement, I must make one thing clear in advance. Your pollution problem is extremely complex. No matter how much you pay, there is no way I can guarantee success. In other words, you might pay the price and still fail to regain your health. In fact, the condition might even worsen." With a flick of Saul's wrist, a contract appeared at his fingertips. "If you agree, then let's sign a liability waiver first." By the time the old witch hurried over, all she saw was Saul already setting off on his return journey. The supposedly dangerous second-rank wizard was standing with his back to Lake Rhine, tightly gripping a piece of parchment in his hand. "No need for me to save the day anymore," the old witch cackled. "Even so, my appearance fee still stands." Appearance fee was a new phrase Saul had casually thrown out during a previous incident when he'd asked her to ambush an enemy. The old witch had learned, and now used it herself. At this moment, Saul still had a hint of excitement on his face. Hearing the old witch's words, he didn't show his usual reluctance, but instead readily agreed to her demand. "Hi, no problem." Hearing Saul agree so quickly, the old witch instantly regretted asking for so little. But she also understood Saul's nature well. If she were to go back on her word now, he'd likely not only refuse but also use the chance to revoke his original offer. She could only suspiciously glance at the second-rank wizard standing with his back to Lake Rhine, still unable to figure out what had gotten Saul so happy. But Saul had no intention of telling her. After returning to the wizard tower, he summoned several soul projections. "I'm planning to accept Justin's request and attempt to treat and cleanse his pollution." The projections exchanged glances. None voiced any objections. While they would offer their suggestions, once Saul made a decision, they would follow it unconditionally. The old witch hadn't been part of the earlier discussion and didn't know who Justin was, so naturally, she had nothing to object to. But she quickly pieced things together from what Saul said next. Although Justin is a metal-element wizard, he somehow has several third-rank dark element spells in his possession. Before treatment, I can choose one freely, and after the treatment, regardless of the outcome, he'll let me pick another. Saul couldn't figure out how this man had come to possess so many third-rank dark element spells. After all, most first-rank wizards had only studied 2 or 3 third-rank spells aligned with their own element. Plus, he knows some things about the tribunal, like the Shattered Goblet. Ever since Saul had snatched that tribunal specialty, the Shattered Goblet, from Mentor Guido, he'd yet to find the correct way to use it. He could only crudely use it to shred intact soul bodies. But in truth, complete soul bodies were usually far more valuable than scattered soul fragments. So that Shattered Goblet hadn't seen much use before he sealed it away deep in the storage vessel. Yet, judging from what Justin had said, the Shattered Goblet actually served a very important purpose, such as producing certain special, luminous soul fragments. Justin had brought Saul far too many unexpected surprises, and he was beginning to realize more clearly that this man's identity was far from that of an ordinary wanted criminal. There were likely even deeper secrets waiting to be uncovered. So in the end, Saul decided to allow Justin into the wizard tower for treatment. If he kept treating patients outside Lake Rhine as he had before, it would neither ensure confidentiality nor prevent unexpected events from spiraling out of his control. But if Justin was to become the very first outsider to set foot in the Purity Wizard Tower, Saul needed to ensure he remained fully under their supervision. Old Witch, I'll arrange for Justin to stay on the third floor. We'll also assign someone to keep an eye on him. Your main task is to make sure he doesn't enter the underground level. The old witch rolled her eyes. She was just about to refuse when she saw Saul stretch out a hand. Deal. The old witch's eyes turned as she changed tack. Though I didn't expect it, that Justin out there really is the same Justin I once knew. Everyone turned toward her in surprise. You actually know Justin outside? Saul asked, even more astonished. The old witch dragged a chair over and plopped down, curling her legs up and resting them on the seat. Justin, yes. Anyone who's spent a few years in the borderland has heard of him, a rather unlucky second-rank wizard. Everyone leaned in with interest, eager to hear the gossip about a second-rank wizard. He came from an old family in Nefret. The clan had already fallen from prominence, but life was still decent. Every generation produced at least one true wizard. Unfortunately, his family was suddenly placed under a tribunal restriction order. If they couldn't produce a third-rank wizard within 3 years, all members would be purged. The surrounding consciousness forms exchanged uneasy glances. Even Saul couldn't help clenching his fists. What's a tribunal restriction order, and on what basis do they issue such orders? The others subtly leaned forward as well. Herman couldn't resist saying, "Back when I was on the land drifters with the captain, we once ran into a tribunal purge. I heard that anyone who fails to meet the criteria set by a restriction order will be executed. At the time, the target was a first-rank wizard who tried hiding out on the ship, but the captain refused. He said he didn't dare defy the tribunal." The old witch sneered coldly at that. Your captain was right. In this world, the only ones who dare openly defy the tribunal are the Stargate Council of Iskaper. Maybe you could add the Sky City of the Sky Islands too. Those are the only places with 2 or more fourth-rank wizards. The tribunal's chief is the fourth-rank wizard Frim. They make him out to be some kind of god. Supposedly, wherever there's light, his will is present. Of course, I don't buy into that. But the tribunal really does stick its hand into everything, even matters that go completely against its stated ideals, like Iskapers, for example. So although they officially claim they won't enter the borderland, I don't believe that for a second. At the very least, they certainly wouldn't ignore this place entirely. Third-rank wizards were already figures people could only look up to, let alone fourth-rank. This only made everyone more curious about what kind of beings fourth-rank wizards actually were. The old witch shared what she knew. Frim's tribunal held sway over 2 of Nefret's great empires, Evernite and Orlan. The symbol of Evernite was the Red Sea tree that blanketed the entire coastline. Orlan was the domain of the fishfolk. Nefret's other empire, Blackflame, fared slightly better. Since the royal family itself possessed a fourth-rank wizard, the tribunal's control over it wasn't quite so absolute. Still, on the surface, even Blackflame had to obey the tribunal's directives. Hearing this, Saul couldn't resist asking his earlier question again. So then, what exactly is the tribunal judging? What are the restriction orders meant to restrict? The old witch's face darkened. She looked directly at Saul's young face and said, "You've hit the crux of the matter, but I don't know either." Chapter 569, Who Doesn't Have a Problem Here? For most people, the tribunal had always been a mysterious presence. Even many powerful wizards only understood its superficial operational rules, while the underlying logic remained hidden. The old witch admitted frankly that she, too, didn't know the full story. While I don't know why they decided to act, I do know that this group will sometimes help the weak unconditionally, and at other times they might suddenly kill a powerful ally. At most, they restrain themselves a little when dealing with Escaper and Sky City. Normally, they won't act openly. Herman pressed his legs together and shrank his neck. The more I hear, the scarier it sounds. Are we really going to treat a wizard wanted by the tribunal? As soon as he said it, Herman regretted it. Wasn't that a direct challenge to Saul's decision? But before he could apologize, he heard Saul communicating with several consciousness bodies through the diary. My decision to treat Justin is, at its core, driven by a desire to understand the tribunal more deeply. The consciousness bodies on the surface appeared unmoved, as though they had fallen silent due to Herman's question. Saul's voice came from within the diary. You all heard it too. The tribunal's execution orders and restriction orders are issued suddenly, and outsiders never know the reasons behind them. That alone is terrifying. If you don't know the reasons, you can't even avoid them intentionally. I don't want to wake up one day and find I've suddenly been marked for elimination. Saul stood up and walked to the window. Through the thin mist, he could still see the figure standing by Lake Rhine. Besides, we're not without ties to the tribunal. There were traces of their involvement in the rebellion at Wizard Gorsa's tower. Mentor Guido was a fugitive from Nefrit at the time, and he had one of their local magic tools, the soul-shattering goblet. He even said back then that the tribunal forbids the resurrection of wizards below third rank. And what Mentor had been researching for years was exactly the kind of experiment the tribunal prohibits. Ans led the rebellion, and several factions joined forces. It's not impossible that the tribunal was pulling strings behind the scenes. I don't want to be constantly targeted, openly or covertly, every time I perform an experiment, and not even know the reason why. I've decided to try treating Justin. This time, Saul said it out loud. And this time, no one raised any objections. The old witch looked to her left, then to her right, starting to suspect that the people in front of her had secretly agreed on something without including her. But she hadn't sensed any magic fluctuations just now. Her emotions were conflicted. After making the decision, Saul felt much lighter inside. He rested both hands on the window, still gazing outside. But now his gaze had shifted from Justin's silhouette to the distant horizon. In his heart, he silently pondered. I wonder if Mentor knew that the rebellion at the Wizard Tower might have had the tribunal's hand behind it. What? Gorsa, are you insane? A second-rank wizard had half his head smashed into the ground. His limbs were pinned by strange black shadows from Gorsa's body, leaving him completely immobile. He was still trying to threaten Gorsa, struggling to save himself. Even if you're from the Glare family, laying a hand on someone from the tribunal, you must have a death wish. Gorsa spoke calmly without rush. If you don't say anything, and I don't say anything, who will ever know? Just as he finished, the pinned second-rank wizard's eyes widened abruptly. A sound like a snapped string echoed inside his skull. The unlucky wizard convulsed violently. The light in his eyes vanished instantly, and his whole body went limp. Gorsa had killed a tribunal arbiter without hesitation. Now I can be sure you won't be talking. Gorsa stood up, and several tiny black dots crawled out from his shadow, sliding beneath the dead wizard's skin. Before long, the wizard's skin suddenly swelled up like an inflated balloon. What followed was a horrifying tearing sound. Then Gorsa leaned down, and with a light tug, peeled the second-rank wizard's entire skin off in one piece. He muttered an incantation, cleansing the dust from the surface, and casually draped the skin over himself. He didn't morph into the dead wizard's appearance. That would be too easy to see through. Gorsa merely borrowed the man's unique aura. With this disguise as a tribunal arbiter, he could now move freely through most of Nefrit. Then he wrapped his face in white bandages, an outfit quite common on the continent of Nefret. Most wizards in Nefret specialized in dark elements. Gorsa borrowed a bit of that aura and disguised himself as a second-rank dark element wizard. As he ventured deeper into the Evernight Empire, he also practiced his shadow manipulation skills. Fully changed, Gorsa now walked openly and confidently through a small border town on the edge of the Evernight Empire. The people in the city all appeared excited and stirred. Gorsa drew close to a group and listened in as they discussed an upcoming grand coronation to be held by the Evernight Empire. The Evernight Empire actually found a new royal bloodline. Gorsa clapped his hands, his exposed eyes narrowing. That saves me the trouble. I'll go straight to that new emperor. Red Sea Tree Source, bloodline of the Dark Knight, has the tribunal intervened, as annoying as flies. While Gorsa cheerfully headed toward the Evernight capital, Saul was, for the first time, inviting a patient to reside in his wizard tower. And true to his word, Justin immediately took out 3 dark element spells for Saul to choose from. Saul took the scrolls and unrolled them, reading brief introductions to the 3 third-rank spells. Feign Death, Healing Touch, and a summoning spell, Undead Lieutenant. Saul immediately eliminated the Undead Lieutenant option. He currently had 4 soul entities around him, each with their own will and autonomy, far beyond the capabilities of such sluggish undead creatures. As for Feign Death and Healing Touch, Saul didn't hesitate long before choosing Healing Touch. For one, he was sorely lacking in healing spells. The only healing spell he had was a first-rank light injury treatment. Feign Death, on the other hand, was too passive. Though it had its merits, it could toughen one's resilience in harsh environments and temporarily raise resistance against various elemental damages. In the end, Saul chose Healing Touch. This third-rank spell, when used to heal others, could transfer the target's vitality to the caster. However, there would be a certain loss of vitality during the transfer. The exact rate of loss depended on the caster's skill, at worst a 10-to-1 loss, and at best nearly 1-to-1. Saul accepted Healing Touch. Though he was eager to start studying it, he curbed his curiosity and began explaining the precautions to Justin. Given how complex your condition is, we need to examine your body before starting formal treatment, so we can determine your current state and formulate a treatment plan. Justin had already agreed to fully comply with Saul's instructions during the treatment, so he raised no objections. For the time being, you'll stay on the 3rd floor. Without permission, you may not enter any other areas. Otherwise, according to the contract we signed, I can terminate your treatment at any time. No problem, Justin agreed readily. After listing all the precautions, Saul had Agu perform a basic examination on Justin, while he went down to the Wizard Tower's first basement to consult with Camus about the treatment plan. At that moment, the old witch, who was originally supposed to be watching over Justin, wandered in out of boredom. "You brat, when are you going to clear out all the pollution from my body?" The old witch wore an expression of someone who'd been duped, glaring at Saul. "If you can handle someone as complicated as Justin, then there's no way you can't clear out my pollution too." The more she spoke, the angrier she got. Her chest heaved with emotion. "And besides, that pollution was your doing." The old witch had suddenly grown smarter. What was going on? She clearly hadn't modified her brain during her wizard body reconstruction. Saul held back a laugh and replied earnestly, "Back then, to protect myself, I mixed the pollution source into the base materials for your wizard body reconstruction. Once your reconstruction was complete, the pollution source took deep root within you. If we were to try and clear it out completely now, it might damage the future potential of your perfect body. The best option is to wait until your perfect body stabilizes, when there's no need for further transformation. Then I'll help you eliminate all pollution." Having said that, Saul thoughtfully handed the decision back to the old witch. "So, what do you think? Sounds good." The old witch couldn't quite put her finger on what was wrong, but she felt that everything was wrong. She didn't respond to Saul, just muttered curses under her breath. At that moment, Camus suddenly turned her head and said his first words to the old witch. "Your problem isn't just pollution." That one simple sentence made the old witch's face go pale. She spun around and stormed off, muttering to herself, "Who here doesn't have some kind of problem?" Chapter 570, Dream. After the old witch fled in panic, Camus said calmly, "Her perfect body's upper limit is only at the level of a third-rank wizard." Saul laughed. "Isn't a third-rank wizard impressive enough?" Camus's lips moved slightly, as if she had different thoughts, but in the end she said nothing. Except when studying and researching, she never expressed any opinions. Like a sealed box, making it impossible to see through what was truly hidden within. After a moment, Camus spoke to Saul again. "You're the same. You need to adapt to the third wizard body transformation and cannot relax your requirements for yourself. Improving magical power is important, but advancing mental strength cannot stagnate either. You need to enhance your body's capacity for spiritual entities to avoid being overwhelmed during the formal transformation." Saul knew Camus's advice was important, and indeed he hadn't been slack in his own improvement. "I know. Ever since establishing the Wizard Tower at Rhine Lake, I've been constantly fishing for spiritual entities in the lake, using them to strengthen my mental power." Previously, Saul's mental strength could rival that of an ordinary second-rank wizard. Now he had already surpassed ordinary second-rank wizards. However, because of this, the number of spiritual entities in the lake was also declining dramatically, causing the time needed for soul fishing to grow increasingly longer. Camus stared at Saul's face, seemingly confirming the changes in his spiritual body and physical form. After a moment, she withdrew her gaze without offering any evaluation, instead changing the topic. "Besides attempting to fuse large quantities of souls, you also need to activate your locator. Perceive it, familiarize yourself with it, apply it, and finally incorporate its characteristics into yourself. This will help you advance to second rank." Saul understood this principle, but it was easier said than done, especially since his locator was the Death Wizard's diary. "My locator's characteristic is predicting death, foreseeing the future, applying the locator's traits to myself. Does this mean I need to possess prophetic abilities too?" Saul couldn't help but smile bitterly at the thought. When a locator was too powerful, it could sometimes be troublesome. The sigh that had just escaped his lips was suddenly drawn back in by Saul. "Wait, can I really not prophesy?" Saul suddenly remembered that in his first year after arriving in this world, he'd had several strange dreams. Among them, the dream of the maid turning into a puppet and Seed searching for him in the morgue both carried somewhat mysterious qualities. If combined with the dangers he encountered afterward, calling them prophetic dreams wasn't entirely impossible. Saul stroked his chin, falling into deep thought. At that time, the dreams I had seemed to have some meaning of foreseeing danger. Could I really have talent in this area? Saul had never studied prophetic magic. First, he had the diary and didn't need it himself. Second, he was advancing too quickly. He hadn't even finished learning knowledge in his own field, so naturally he had no time or energy to study other temporarily unnecessary knowledge. Moreover, after he began systematically studying magic, he rarely had such dreams anymore. It was as if once a complete knowledge system was established, instinct would actually degenerate. Saul's thoughts gradually drifted, and Camus stopped speaking as well, seemingly unconcerned with Saul's condition. The underground first floor fell completely silent. Advancing to second rank wasn't a task that could be completed in the short term. After thinking for a while, Saul let himself off the hook and focused on the knowledge and experiments at hand. He went upstairs and used soul fishing to extract a bit of pollution from Justin's body, preparing to take it back for experiments. He just hadn't expected that moving even this tiny amount of pollution would cause the pollution source in Justin's body to suddenly rage, immediately worsening his injuries. Fortunately, Justin understood his own physical condition very well and quickly controlled the situation's development, though he would need to rest quietly for some time. While he was injured this time, it also confirmed that Saul was quite capable of dealing with pollution, which strengthened his confidence. After Saul helped Justin recover, he took the newly obtained pollution downstairs. The entire 3-story wizard tower was left with only Justin. When night fell, Justin, who had been lying down all afternoon, suddenly climbed up from the wooden bed. He walked to the open space in the center of the room. Golden light spread beneath his feet, and a new metallic regular tetrahedron gradually formed, enveloping Justin's entire body. Inside the sealed space, Justin raised his right hand and rolled up his sleeve. In the middle of his forearm was a shallow bruise. His left fingertip transformed into a small blade, lightly sliding along the bruise. The skin and flesh immediately parted, but no blood flowed out. In the gap between the red muscle fibers, a red seed the size of a sesame grain was faintly pulsing. Just like a living heart. Justin observed the heart for a while, and seeing its vitality undiminished, relaxed slightly. "I cannot die yet," he thought. "The continuation of the Black Knight royal family cannot end with me." Justin pressed the wound. Worried that magical fluctuations would be conspicuous, he didn't use magic but let the wound heal naturally. After a moment, confirming that the skin and flesh had reconnected, he restored himself to normal, dismissed the golden tetrahedron, and sat back down to meditate. That night, Saul, who habitually used meditation to replace sleep and only truly slept when occasionally mentally exhausted, chose to lie on the soft bed made of mushrooms. Suddenly trying to sleep with a specific purpose, I'm actually having insomnia. After lying there for a long time and unusually failing to fall asleep, Saul stood up again. "Relax," Penny comforted Saul with giggles in his mind. "If Brother Saul really can't sleep, I can help you." "No, I'm worried that other forces intervening might affect the nature of the dream." Saul refused Penny's suggestion, took several deep breaths, lay back down, closed his eyes, and fell into contemplation. Saul wanted to have prophetic dreams, but he also knew this matter had little certainty. Moreover, from his memory, prophetic dreams generally appeared when he was in dangerous situations. Although Saul was currently in the borderland, he didn't face any major life-or-death crisis for the moment. After all, the diary hadn't issued any warnings. But the diary's warnings are also incomplete. As long as I can survive the crisis myself, even if everyone else dies, the diary probably won't provide warnings. He couldn't rely entirely on the diary for judging danger. Gradually, his attention was diverted, and drowsiness slowly surged up. He actually fell asleep bit by bit. There, Saul opened his eyes and found himself standing in a gray, hazy world. He was positioned high in the air, looking down at the earth. "This place is the borderland." Saul looked down and saw the familiar mushroom forest and Rhine Lake surrounded by the mushroom forest. The pristine white purity wizard tower stood on the island in the lake's center, appearing somewhat hazy. Boom! The earth trembled. Saul hurriedly looked toward the source of the sound. In the mountain range behind him, there was actually a giant slowly walking. The giant was covered with milky white bells, but the bells made no sound as it walked. A wave of heat came from Saul's left side. Saul looked over in confusion and actually saw a great fire spreading across the entire plain. Heaven and earth seemed to be burned to ash by the flames, and within the ash countless human faces were writhing and wailing, extending toward the sky along with the black smoke. Saul unconsciously followed the smoke upward with his gaze, and saw a flying shadow in the equally gray sky. The flying shadow was moving away from Saul at great speed, seemingly fleeing. But as it flew, it suddenly shot toward the sky at an even faster speed. No, it was more like falling toward the endless sky, until even Saul's gaze could no longer capture it. After the figure completely disappeared into the sky, Saul faintly heard a desperate and piercing wail. "What's happening?" He unconsciously spoke aloud, hugging his arms with both hands, falling into inexplicable fear. Then he felt something was wrong. Looking down, his two hands and the arms they were grasping had only black skeletal frames remaining. The tattered wizard robes fluttered in the wind, and the body revealed beneath the robes had no flesh whatsoever. Saul fearfully raised his hands to touch his own face. Bone against bone created a hoarse grinding sound. Chapter 571, Chain Reaction. Dreammaker Clark opened his eyes. It was just dawn outside. However, the morning sun breaking through the clouds couldn't dispel all the gloom in his heart. Clark stared blankly at the window, momentarily unable to distinguish between dream and reality. At that moment, a tiny firefly suddenly appeared in the air. In the bright world, the faint glow at its tail was barely visible. The firefly landed on the window, and a mature man's voice came from within it. "Clark, was this your doing?" Clark seemed to awaken from a great dream, blinking once. "If you're talking about last night's dream, I can guarantee it wasn't my influence." The firefly flapped its wings at high frequency, looking quite agitated. "Really not you?" "You know I don't have time right now." Clark raised his arm and traced a circle in the air. Colorful tiny scales fell from his skin, then disappeared before hitting the ground. Inside the circle Clark had drawn, a scene suddenly appeared: the vast earth, a giant walking among mountains, burning plains, and a flying shadow falling into deep space. You had the same dream too." The firefly's voice carried a trace of unease. "If Wind Sprite also had the same dream, then we can confirm this wasn't a dream." "It's a portent." The firefly's voice grew somber. After a moment, the glow at the firefly's tail disappeared. The little insect lost its vitality and fell straight to the ground, soon turning into a ball of flames and vanishing. "Herbert will definitely notify the tribunal. If the tribunal knows but the Stargate Council doesn't, that would be disadvantageous to me." Clark yawned. "But if the Stargate Council comes, it won't be good for my closing the net. After all, we've already reached the final stage." Clark slowly closed his eyes and soon entered a new dream. Unlike Clark, who didn't much care about his subordinate forces, Firefly Lord Herbert was someone with extremely strong possessiveness. He didn't like things appearing that exceeded his control. In the vast deep forest, a large patch of fluorescent yellow light suddenly rose. Looking closely, it was actually a magnificent sight composed of fireflies. The fireflies gathered in the sky, gradually forming a giant 10 meters tall. All the wizards and ordinary people living near the deep forest fell to their knees. However, wizards could kneel on one knee, while ordinary people had to press their faces tightly to the ground. The giant looked down and gave an instruction to the forest, then transformed back into large patches of light, quickly disappearing into the horizon. As the light faded into the distance, it dropped a point of light that drifted down, landing precisely on an ordinary person who had just stood up. Before he could react to what was happening, he saw the people around him retreat in terror. The next moment, this unfortunate soul burst into enormous flames. In just a few dozen seconds, He was burned until not even bones remained. Finally, only a bit of grayish-white dust fell, merging into the equally grayish-white soil. There, in a deep cave atop towering cliffs, Wind Sprite was hugging her knees, trembling. It had been a long time since she'd been this afraid. At this moment, a maid stood outside the door reporting, "Lord Wind Sprite, Firefly Lord, Firefly Lord." Wind Sprite raised her head and saw a humanoid figure composed of fireflies had already appeared before her. "Go out, I can see him." The person outside felt relieved and quickly withdrew. "Portents have appeared in the borderland. You, I, and Clark were all contaminated and transformed in the portent." Wind Sprite gritted her teeth. "I saw it. I've already reported the portent to the tribunal. They will send people." Wind Sprite looked puzzled. Didn't the tribunal agree with the Stargate Council not to enter the borderland? Clark also dreamed of the portent, and you know he has the Stargate Council's backing. As long as both the Stargate Council and tribunal enter the borderland, it won't be breaking the agreement, but terminating it. Wind Sprite gritted her teeth. The borderland probably can't withstand this. The rule forces here will become completely chaotic. They understand this better than you or I. Firefly Lord Herbert's voice carried a trace of disdain. The problem now is that we can't do nothing. Wind Sprite's beautiful eyes flickered for a moment. "What do you want me to do?" "Suspend our opposition and cooperate for now. Since portents have appeared, there must be changes somewhere here that cannot be ignored. We need to investigate every inch of land, especially areas where rules have recently changed. This would require too many people. Moreover, areas where rules have changed are extremely dangerous. Those sent to investigate might not return alive." "HMPH," Herbert sneered. "Send those captive ordinary people with wizards recording on the side. If there aren't enough people, then force them to breed and mature children forcefully." Wind Sprite didn't have that many ordinary people under her command, nor was she particularly enthusiastic about watching humans struggle and die. However, now was the time to be overly considerate. "Fine, I'll send people to gather nearby ordinary people and have them investigate." Only then did Firefly Lord Herbert nod with satisfaction. The features composed of fireflies showed no expression, yet Wind Sprite could sense a trace of contempt from him. After the uninvited fireflies scattered and disappeared into the darkness, Wind Sprite called for her maid. "How is the person we sent last time?" "He hasn't sent any messages yet." Wind Sprite leaned against the long chair, her entire being appearing weightless, as if she might float away at any moment. Her voice was also ethereal and uncertain, like sleep-talking in a dream. "Then give him a little more time. People from the tribunal are coming. If he doesn't want to be captured and taken back, he should obey me properly." Having slept soundly and feeling refreshed, Saul had no idea that the entire borderland was about to be thrown into chaos because of his one dream. Though he now clearly understood what his dream should portend, he still couldn't determine its true meaning. Of course, he had his suspicions, but this matter couldn't be discussed with others. Having had this dream, Saul felt a vague sense of urgency in his heart. He knew he had to find every possible way to advance to second rank as quickly as possible. If his dream represented some kind of portent like before, then his environment would probably undergo tremendous changes very soon. With Camus's cooperation and brainstorming from others, Saul formulated a treatment plan for Justin on the third day. He planned to design a damage-sharing magic array to temporarily reduce the injury's impact on Justin, then take the opportunity to absorb part of the pollution at the fastest possible speed. The main purpose was to help the injuries and pollution on Justin's body reach a new balance at a lower level. This would buy him more time for treatment. If everything went smoothly, Repeating this treatment several times could reduce both the pollution and injuries to a level Justin could bear. Then Saul could directly absorb all the pollution, while Justin wouldn't die from his injuries flaring up. Justin looked at Saul's plan and agreed to cooperate without hesitation. This treatment plan wasn't complex, but it concealed the most crucial step. How exactly would Saul absorb the pollution from his body? Chapter 572, The Night of Vengeance. Justin provided most of the materials and magic crystals needed for the treatment, so Saul could begin treatment directly, without having to collect various magic materials again. Before starting the first pollution reduction experiment, both of them rested well. Especially Justin. After entering deep sleep, he meditated for another 3 hours, bringing his spiritual body to its most stable state. Meanwhile, Saul had already drawn the magic array outside the wizard tower and was doing a final check. Since this was the first time using this self-designed array, despite having Camus's approval and the diary's silence, Saul still checked it over and over again. After ensuring he was thoroughly familiar with the function of every rune, he had Agu ask Justin to come out. Justin walked down from the wizard tower and immediately saw the massive magic array in front of it, with a row of human figures standing around the array, looking like children. But when Justin approached, he discovered these children were actually dolls made of special materials, without facial features. These are dolls that will bear your injuries. You can also call them substitute dolls. Saul briefly explained the array's characteristics to Justin so he could cooperate with transferring the damage. The substitute dolls were inspired by Saul's previous memories, but since they were self-designed, they could only be used within magic arrays, transferring damage to the dolls through massive magical power channeling. The prerequisite was also that the subject couldn't resist the spell. After informing Justin of all precautions, Saul pointed toward the center of the array. "Then let's begin." Justin nodded and calmly walked past the substitute dolls into the array. After confirming Justin was positioned and fully relaxed, Saul stood at one corner of the array with Agu, Anne, and Herman at the other 3 corners. Saul was responsible for directing the array, while the other 3 consciousness bodies assisted with adjustments. "Let's start." He exhaled, and his mental power and magical power began surging. The enormous energy became substantial, distorting the surrounding air. The substitute dolls around the array began trembling slightly, as if they too felt fear. Justin lowered his gaze to the ground, watching the magic crystals at the 4 corners light up one by one. Snap, 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 snap. It was as if dozens of people were walking barefoot on the twisted lines of the magic array, while also stepping on his soul. When the magical power was fully channeled, the lines and runes throughout the array also began to distort. The substitute dolls around them raised their arms one by one, seeming to want to flee. Boom! A soundless impact descended upon Justin's spirit and flesh. He instantly felt some force cutting beneath his skin, then like a filtering cloth, slowly draining the pollution from his body. Justin's face turned deathly pale from pain. The feeling was like having interwoven threads buried in his body, then slowly drawing them out after the wounds healed. Outside the array, Saul was concentrating intently on carefully controlling the magical power, ensuring the giant net tearing at Justin's body wouldn't break away too quickly. Soon, harsh metallic scraping sounds began emanating from Justin's body. The pollution source had appeared. Through his mental perception, Saul discovered black shadows emerging all over the other's body, with the most concentrated at the back of his head. Saul spread his hands, his 10 fingers transforming into soft, semi-transparent tentacles that gradually extended, taking control of the black spots one by one, but carefully avoiding the back of Justin's head. He couldn't touch the pollution source there yet. As Saul's tentacles made contact with Justin's body, the substitute dolls around the array began developing facial features. The newly changed faces actually bore 7/10 resemblance to Justin. These substitute dolls no longer tried to flee, but instead turned around, gazing at Justin's body with intense longing. Now I am him, so I can replace him. Inside the dolls were soul fragments full of greedy malice that Saul had specifically selected. Only such consciousness would make the substitute dolls actively establish a connection with Justin. Then the first substitute doll lifted its foot from the ground and took a step toward the center of the array. With the first came the second, the third. Soon, dozens of dolls were slowly moving toward Justin. At the same time, the dolls desperately wanting to seize Justin's body didn't notice that the moment they moved toward Justin, their bodies began showing signs of strong acid corrosion. Their skin made sizzling sounds, like meat on a hot plate. Fingertips and knees suddenly caved inward, as if something had dripped on them, instantly corroding flesh and skin. But the desire to regain bodies made these painless dolls ignore the abnormalities on their bodies. They continued approaching Justin, as if merely touching him would let them truly steal his body. Saul slowly absorbed the pollution from Justin's body. Several consciousness bodies constantly adjusted the array on the ground. When they found a doll running too fast, they would reduce the conduction efficiency of the runes where it stood. But despite the consciousness body's control, these substitute dolls still gradually approached Justin. The nearest substitute doll was less than a meter from Justin. Of course, its damage was also the most severe. Both its arms had already corroded away completely, and even one foot had disappeared up to the knee. If not for magical power supporting it, it would have fallen long ago. Saul calculated the time, can hold on for another 3 minutes. Though little time remained, Saul didn't increase the frequency of absorbing pollution. Because if pollution separated too quickly, causing suddenly worsened injuries that couldn't be transferred to the substitute dolls in time, it would create an imbalance in Justin's internal injuries. At this pace, probably 3 more such experiments could reduce the pollution in Justin's body to a relatively safe range. Suddenly, Saul heard enormous sounds from behind. He paused, absorbing pollution, and looked back. The mushroom forest by Rhine Lake was actually shaking. Large amounts of spores scattered, creating towering white mist. Someone had broken into the mushroom forest. Moreover, judging by the situation, it seemed like a very rough forced entry. Otherwise, the mushroom forest wouldn't have such a strong reaction. The visitor came with ill intent. Saul didn't hesitate and immediately severed his tentacles. Someone with malicious intent has come. Today's array ends here. Herman, take Justin back to rest. Although Justin was second rank, patients were at their weakest. He couldn't be expected to fight at this time. And go call the old witch. Train soldiers for 1,000 days to use them for 1 hour. I'm here. The old witch walked out from the arched door of the wizard tower. She had been secretly watching and studying the operating principles of Saul's array. Saul let her watch. Given the old witch's basic knowledge of runes and arrays, she couldn't learn it even after watching 10 times. Just then, the mushroom forest's defenses were finally breached. The mushroom tree closest to Rhine Lake was cut down with a single slash. The entire mushroom crashed down, revealing the invader behind it. A fully armored figure wearing a silver-gray metal helmet, mounted on a black, tall, 4-legged fierce beast, was crossing the wide Rhine Lake, staring directly at the White Purity Wizard Tower. Saul looked back and saw the invader's head slowly lower from looking up until their eyes met. This is a bit troublesome. The old witch's voice was hoarse and low. He's riding a gallows beast, That thing has terrifyingly high magic resistance and is a fierce beast that can withstand third-rank magic. Chapter 573, The Fierce Knight. Which one of you is Wizard Saul of the Purity Wizard Tower? The fully armored figure across from them, separated by Rhine Lake, clearly transmitted his deep voice. This person was a knight. Due to the distance, Saul couldn't clearly sense the mental power fluctuations from the other party. But that heavy cavalry bearing and the gallows beast beneath him were indeed intimidating. He somewhat timidly glanced at the diary first. Good, no reaction. Saul stepped forward, walked to the lakeside, and raised his voice in response. I am. Excellent. The figure across nodded, then suddenly clamped his legs hard against the gallows beast's waist and charged directly at Saul. The gallows beast's heavy hooves struck hard against the solid ice of Rhine Lake, actually creating cracks across the entire ice surface. Fine ice shards flew up, reflecting dazzling sunlight. The gallows beast's charge accompanied the sound of cracking ice, thundering loudly. Though it was clearly just one person, it had the terrifying momentum of thousands of troops charging at Saul. Saul felt a cold wind rushing toward his face, actually making his skin sting. His expression remained unchanged as he stepped back 2 paces. Little algae submerged underground, revealing sharp teeth. Anne and Herman simultaneously manifested soul armaments, standing in front of Saul in battle formation. HMPH, does he think I don't exist? Unexpectedly, the old witch actually stepped forward voluntarily. She raised her hand horizontally, and then Saul noticed the air in front of him seemed to have solidified. The gallows beast was extremely fast, reaching them almost immediately after everyone had set up their defenses. Boom! Like 2 massive rocks colliding, the gallows beast slammed hard into the transparent air wall released by the old witch. The tremendous sound seemed to make the entire Lake Island tremble. Such intense impact caused no damage to the gallows beast, which only shook its head slightly in confusion before recovering. But the old witch, as the caster, didn't look well. Though her face was hidden under a large hood, Saul could still sense her anger. The heavily armored knight across from them snorted coldly and reached back to draw a conical spear. The spear tip traced a semicircle in the air, creating a whistling wind, then thrust fiercely into the air wall blocking his path. Screech! An extremely grating sound arose, making Saul furrow his brow tightly. The opponent twisted his wrist and pushed, actually piercing the spear straight through the air wall. Once the magic defense was broken, the original magical structure instantly collapsed. Without resistance, the spear continued forward, thrusting toward Saul's head. Saul stepped back again, staring intently at the sharp spear point. If you've come to kill me, could you first explain our grievance? He continued playing the harmless healer role. You killed Langwin, he was my friend, the knight across actually answered. But even while answering Saul, his attacking movements showed no hesitation. What Langwin, friend, do you think I don't exist? The old witch had now completed the incantation for her next magic. She placed her palms together and rubbed lightly, creating several small tornadoes that emerged from her hands and quickly swirled toward the gallows beast's limbs. The gallows beast had tremendous strength, but the tornadoes didn't directly oppose its power. They simply disrupted its balance points while it moved, immediately making the massive gallows beast unable to advance, slipping continuously in place. Seeing the gallows beast trapped, the knight rolled to the side, dismounting while avoiding 2 small tornadoes that swirled toward his arms. Off his mount, the knight remained very agile, dodging the old witch's attacks in just a few steps, his spear once again striking straight toward Saul. The old witch quickly stepped aside and raised her hand again, another air wall directly trapping the knight. Just like when she had confined Saul before. But while this knight's mental power fluctuations weren't strong, his physical capabilities were terrifyingly formidable. The old witch's air confinement couldn't completely restrict his movements. Watching him fight the old witch, he actually had the strength of a second-rank wizard. Just a combat-type second-rank wizard. Saul didn't truly regard him as a knight, just because he wore full armor and rode a fierce beast. Though the magical power and mental power fluctuations on him were very weak, that powerful strength and resilience that could directly resist magic was definitely not something an ordinary knight could achieve. There must be some magic principle involved, though he hadn't discovered the trick yet. Perhaps once he found the trick, the opponent would collapse like a paper tiger. Saul still didn't act. He stood in the rear, watching the knight rely on excellent armor inscribed with magic arrays to withstand the old witch's strike, then take advantage to break free from confinement and counterattack with his spear. The old witch should be happy. She had finally succeeded in drawing the knight's fire. Saul narrowed his eyes, staring intently at the opponent's movements. But under the enhancement of his meditation method, he felt this person looked more and more like a corpse. Those movements twisted to their limits, that incredible explosive power, these often weren't what ordinary flesh could withstand. Saul could see that with each attack, the opponent's body was suffering irreversible damage. He studied the opponent's movements and suddenly noticed something discordant. This person's movements are very agile and his strength is great, but his neck seems somewhat stiff. Saul observed for a few more seconds, a trace of amusement appearing in his eyes. Found your secret. The old witch now only regretted that her body hadn't fully recovered. Her spellcasting efficiency and intensity hadn't reached proper standards. She had actually fought several rounds with someone who just swung a spear around wildly, without any wizardly grace. At one point, she even had to flee in panic to reopen the distance between them. Just as the old witch was thinking about how to defeat this big guy, her peripheral vision suddenly caught sight of a small patch of black. Though her mind hadn't fully processed what Saul was doing, the old witch instinctively cast air confinement again. And this time, her spiritual body shook wildly, using almost her maximum magical output. The knight was confined again. But just as he prepared to break through the confinement with his body like before, a black light suddenly swept across his neck. The knight looked down, then his vision kept rotating. Earth and sky alternately appeared before his eyes. Finally, he saw his own headless body. The knight stopped moving. The powerful physique that had just been so imposing, directly resisting a second-rank wizard, rapidly lost vitality. The old witch turned to glare at Saul. "Brat, who told you to act?" Saul smiled, about to explain, when his expression suddenly changed. "Careful, he's still moving." The old witch realized something was wrong the moment Saul's expression changed, but her evasive movements were still a beat too slow. A conical spear came with a piercing sound, thrusting fiercely into her chest. The old witch glared angrily with wide eyes, but showed no expression of pain on her face. She grabbed the spear that had pierced her body, and an invisible wave suddenly traveled along the spear shaft toward the knight's headless corpse. Magic and flesh collided again. Saul was puzzled. He had clearly severed the magical convergence point, so why could the opponent still move? Could it be controlled by some other method? Then the controller must still be nearby. Saul's gaze turned to the head that had fallen to the ground. Just as he looked down, the head that had been silent since falling suddenly opened its eyes. The moment their eyes met, Saul felt his spiritual body tremble violently. When he came to his senses, he found himself standing in a square, completely enclosed large box. He also couldn't sense any magical power in his body. Only his mental power was still actively fluctuating. This environment seemed so familiar. Saul said in shock, This is a consciousness space. He had actually been dragged into someone else's consciousness space. Chapter 574, Turning the Tables. You react quickly. The voice came from overhead. Saul immediately looked up and discovered that what had been a sealed ceiling was now opened like a lid. A massive face that looked 60 or 70 years old, somewhat aged but full of malice, appeared above his head. Many people die without ever knowing where they died. But that's all there is to it. Since you've entered my consciousness space, there's no way I'll let you leave alive. Suddenly losing the magical power you've always relied on feels quite uncomfortable, doesn't it? Let me help you find relief. A massive palm pressed down from above. The 5 fingers were menacing, seemingly wanting to crush Saul. Your sneak attack magic is quite impressive. Did you use this same magic to kill Langwin back then? Saul couldn't dodge in time and was grabbed by the opponent. The massive fingers transmitted irresistible force, instantly making Saul groan in pain, as if his entire being was about to explode. I didn't kill any Langwin. I don't even know him. Saul spoke intermittently, his face contorted with pain. It's too late to say you haven't seen him now. When he said he wanted to bring Halima's love letter to find you, I should have stopped him. Halima's love letter. Saul finally remembered. Langwin should be that man with the pearl bracelet who had asked him to cleanse the pollution from the bracelet. Or rather, the wolf head on that man's chest. I didn't kill him, Saul immediately explained with difficulty. I refused him, he left. HMPH, do you think I'll believe that? He usually hides, and the only time he might reveal his true form was when he came to find you. And you're the only one around here who could have killed him. I really didn't. Aren't you afraid of killing the wrong person? The head above showed a sorrowful expression. Wrong or right, I'll kill anyway. I won't spare any possible enemy. Remember, the one who killed you is the Retribution Knight, Brando. After Brando finished speaking, his palm suddenly exerted force. Though first-rank wizards weren't exactly weak, their mental power couldn't compare to second-rank wizards. Especially a first-rank wizard who had suddenly lost magical support. In Brando's view, he was barely stronger than an apprentice. He stared fixedly at Saul, anger and sorrow alternating in his eyes. That was his only friend, and Langwin had wanted to remove the pollution from the pearl bracelet to help him. But the other party never returned. Use force, more force. Brando waited to see Saul's consciousness dissolve into a mass of unconscious slime in his palm, and then explode. However, use force, more force. Brando, who continued exerting force trying to crush Saul's consciousness, gradually showed confusion. Why, you're still alive? Seeing Brando's doubtful expression, Saul, who had been grimacing in pain, suddenly dropped all expression. He stared coldly at Brando overhead. So, is that your entire reason? Brando was startled, and his grip on Saul unconsciously loosened slightly. I thought you were sent by Wind Sprite or Dreammaker, Saul muttered. To think it really is an undeserved calamity. Brando finally realized something was wrong. You were pretending. Saul's lips curved into a mocking smile. Just cooperating with your performance. I've already seen your consciousness platform, quite crude. Want to see mine? As soon as Saul finished speaking, a small circular stone slab appeared beneath his feet. The stone slab, inscribed with complex arrays, began rapidly expanding after appearing. When its edges touched the box confining Saul, it effortlessly burst through it. As the circular stone platform enlarged, Saul's body also grew larger, becoming the same size as the giant like Brando in almost an instant. The surrounding black curtain was completely torn apart, and rapidly blinking stars like eyes emerged. Brando felt that in the blink of an eye, Saul, who had been in his grasp with life and death in his hands, had become an equal existence. His withered palm naturally couldn't hold the opponent anymore, and was even directly shaken open by the powerful impact of the other's enlargement. Saul used his own consciousness battlefield to turn the tables, pulling Brando into his home field. Your body in the outside world has always been close combat, making people think you excel at hand-to-hand fighting, but who would have thought your real trump card would be consciousness space battles? To deploy a materialized consciousness space required a wizard's spiritual body to be very stable and supported by powerful mental strength. Brando in the consciousness space was no longer just a head, but his body wasn't as powerful as the knight outside either. He looked more like a withered old man. He had now recovered from his shock, and his gaze toward Saul no longer carried the previous hatred. "So you were lying to me all along." His gaze swept around. For a first-rank wizard to have such powerful mental strength, such a complete consciousness space, it's not strange that Langwin was killed by you. Saul tilted his head. "I'll say it one last time, I didn't kill Langwin. Whether you believe it or not doesn't matter to me. But I'm quite curious. Are you really here to kill me for revenge for Langwin?" Brando's palms, hanging at his sides, suddenly clenched, and two rapiers appeared in his hands. No need for more words. If you think having a powerful consciousness space means you yourself are powerful, then you're gravely mistaken. My consciousness space isn't as complete as yours, but that doesn't mean my spiritual body is weaker than yours. The more powerful and complete a consciousness space is, the more likely it is to harbor dangers. Your blind pursuit of space power is suicidal behavior. Brando placed his twin swords before his abdomen, silently crossing them. "I'll show you what real consciousness combat is. Here I'm the most powerful knight." Sensing the opponent's overwhelming presence, Saul also nodded slightly, becoming serious. His hands began softening and deforming, gradually splitting into countless semi-transparent gray tentacles. The tentacles grew larger and longer, soon hanging to the ground in a pile. The tentacles covering the ground twisted and turned, quickly spreading in all directions, forming a scene that made one's hair stand on end. At the same time, another pair of eyes suddenly opened below Saul's eyes. Those eyes were deep and cold, as if devoid of any emotion. When those eyes looked at Brando, there was no difference from looking at the stone slab beneath his feet or the starry sky above. Brando didn't move. Not because he was gentlemanly waiting for Saul to finish transforming, but because the moment the eyes below Saul's eyes appeared, he felt indescribable fear. Even when facing third-rank wizards, he had never felt so helpless. "Ah!" He suddenly roared, suppressing the fear in his heart, using his waist and abdomen to drive his shoulders and upper arms, throwing the rapiers in his hands toward Saul's head, one left and one right. The sword points were aimed directly at those extra eyes. "So, this is what you call real consciousness combat. Throwing away your weapons right off the bat." Though he found it somewhat incredible, Saul still treated it cautiously. After all, anything could happen in consciousness space. Those thrown rapiers might even suddenly turn into bombs and explode. Two gray tentacles suddenly shot up, each wrapping around a thin sword. The sharp, smooth, thin swords were corroded the moment they were wrapped by the tentacles, becoming dull. With a slight exertion from the tentacles, both thin swords turned into black smoke and completely disappeared. Saul effortlessly blocked this attack. It was so easy that he was rather puzzled. "What other tricks are hidden in this move of yours?" Saul vigilantly returned his attention to Brando, then was stunned. A vertical crack less than 2 meters long had appeared beside Brando at some point, and Brando was desperately trying to squeeze into the crack. When he saw Saul looking over, he actually panicked and exerted force, making a squish sound as his entire body drilled into the vertical crack. The next second, the vertical crack snapped shut and completely disappeared. "This is..." Saul was stunned for a moment, then his expression twisted as he said incredulously, "He ran away." Chapter 575, Tree Seed. Quickly emerging from the consciousness platform, Saul scanned his surroundings. His gaze fell on Rhine Lake, where the headless knight was holding his head, riding the gallows beast, fleeing at an even faster speed than when he arrived. The old witch stood on the nearby ice surface, hands on her hips, helplessly stamping her feet. Seeing Saul approach, she complained, "His gallows beast runs too fast, and you can't fly over Rhine Lake." Saul stood shoulder to shoulder with the old witch, also not pursuing. Even if they caught up, it would be useless. The opponent was a physical-type second-rank wizard. Apart from consciousness battlefield combat, he had no other way to take the opponent's life. The two watched as Brando galloped out of Rhine Lake, but he suddenly stumbled and nearly fell when reaching the shore. It turned out to be Little Algy's offshoot by the lakeside, which had suddenly emerged to trip the gallows beast. Of course, Little Algy was also broken into pieces and immediately retreated into the soil. Seeing the person had gone far away, Saul told the old witch to return to the tower. After this person left, he might very well come back again. Don't leave Rhine Lake during this period. The old witch stiffened her neck. Am I afraid of him? Saul said nothing, only staring at the large hole in the old witch's chest clothing. Earlier, when the old witch fought Brando, she had been pierced by his conical spear. But her perfect body didn't care about such damage and had already recovered. Only her clothes remained torn. A spring scene was revealed. If one didn't look at the old witch's face with its tripled features and aged appearance, this 15 or 16-year-old girl's body was actually quite attractive. The old witch followed Saul's gaze downward and saw the same scenery. Saul quickly said what he had originally intended to say, averting his gaze. "You were pierced right through the body by his spear." The old witch looked up, her expression unchanged. "What do you know? This little injury is nothing to me. I can recover in the blink of an eye. I'm the person who most restrains that tin can." The old witch puffed out her chest and turned back to the wizard tower. Saul stood alone by the lakeside, feeling the breeze. In the distance, the mushroom that Brando had just cut down was slowly recovering. It would still take some time to regrow spores sufficient for warning, but presumably that Brando wouldn't dare return easily. The opponent said he had come here to avenge Langwin. But was it really as he claimed? Since the establishment of the Purity Wizard Tower, apart from Saul's proactive marketing to Jiaji Agu, only 3 waves of people had come asking him to treat pollution. The first was Langwin, wanting to cleanse a pearl bracelet. After that, Clark descended, but considering Master Gorsa's reputation, he ultimately didn't seize the nightmare butterfly. The second was a pair of male and female wizards. They had appeared and been forced to return without even getting names. Even the surveillance behind them was dealt with by the old witch. However, it could be confirmed they were sent by Wind Sprite to test him. The third was Justin, who was currently being treated. But as a second-rank wizard, he shouldn't risk his life to help Wind Sprite test him. But if it was going with the flow... Saul turned his thoughts to Brando, who had just escaped. Was he really here to avenge his friend, or was this another test? If the mastermind behind all this was Wind Sprite, what did she want to do? Or rather, what problem had she encountered? Several questions lingered in Saul's mind. But he currently had too little information. I can't always be so passive. Saul pondered the Wizard Tower's current situation as he slowly turned and walked into the pristine white tower. Justin's treatment continued 4 more times before reaching the balanced state Saul had envisioned. Although he hadn't completely expelled the pollution or truly healed the magical damage within Justin's body. He had at least extended his life by years. However, the fact that Saul's treatment plan was effective was good news. The next phase of treatment might have a chance to completely cure Justin's problems. After completing the final treatment, Saul used Mage Hand to push aside the dolls that had corroded beyond recognition. Your condition is better this time than before. Justin's face was merely pale, but at least he wasn't as agonized as before. He lowered his head slightly to meet Saul's gaze, finally showing a trace of a smile. That's still thanks to you reducing the damage in my body significantly. Saul looked down, skillfully severing the tentacles from his fingertips. Having absorbed the pollution from Justin's body, the tentacles had turned dark brown and occasionally twitched, like a freshly caught live octopus. Justin watched Saul collect the tentacles, knowing the other would continue researching the pollution within. He was silent for a moment, recalling how Saul had earnestly and diligently helped him absorb pollution and balance his injuries all 4 times, and finally spoke up to remind him. I know you're studying the pollution in my body. This might be your habit as a healer, but I still must remind you, pollution from other places is fine, but pollution from the borderland is extremely dangerous. I suggest you seal these contaminants and bury them far away. Otherwise, I fear that one day you'll discover all this pollution has transferred to your own body. Justin's reminder made Saul feel somewhat comforted. At least his efforts to save people weren't wasted. If only all future patients could be as considerate as him and Jiaji Agu. However, Saul already had extensive experience handling pollution from the borderland. Even if accidentally polluted, he wasn't afraid. After all, he was someone ruthless enough to directly absorb pollution from others' bodies and wait for his consciousness space to filter it. Of course, since entering the borderland, after nearly dying from absorbing others' pollution for the first time, Saul no longer foolishly waited directly for the diary to filter it. Saul thought again of the pollution source that was ultimately suppressed by his consciousness space, transforming from a black ocean into a single drop of black tide, and felt Justin might know some inside information. He held up the tentacle already sealed in a test tube. Justin, do you know what the pollution in your body is? Justin showed a troubled expression. He looked at Saul, seeming to want to speak but hesitating, then suddenly raised his arm. The sleeve was rolled up to the elbow, revealing a shallow scar in the center of his inner forearm. Under Saul's gaze, the scar automatically split open. Beneath the red muscle, there was a sesame-sized round particle hidden near the blood vessels. If not for the faint life force emanating from the round particle, Saul might have mistaken it for ordinary proliferative tissue. I once signed an oath. There are some things I cannot tell you directly, but I believe that with your abilities, you'll soon come into contact with this world's secrets. As Justin spoke, he extracted the round particle from his forearm, letting it float before Saul. This is a seed. After it was born, it was deemed a failure by certain people and abandoned. But my master and I never gave up on it. Though we don't know how far this path can lead, its end certainly isn't in the present. If you're going to continue researching borderland pollution, then try cultivating it. It will definitely help in your research. Saul didn't immediately accept the seed from the other's hand. You've hidden this seed so deeply, it must be very important to you, right? Justin smiled. The method for creating seeds is in my mind. That's what's most important to me. Hearing this, Saul still didn't accept the seed. When the seed fell into his palm, Saul immediately felt a weak but extremely tenacious life force. Like wild grass that, even after being burned by wildfire, could still burst forth with new life in spring. What kind of seed is this? Can you tell me that? Of course, Justin's gaze also fell on the seed, his expression gentle. It was created by my master. My master named it the Black Sea Tree, a tree that can grow in black tides and provide energy. The Red Sea trees most commonly planted on the Nefrit continent are actually its variants, HMPH. Unfortunately, they've been altered beyond recognition, yet people still treasure them as precious. Chapter 576, Tribunal's Frim. Saul inquired mentally to Mordin and Penny, who were still in the diary. "Have you heard of Black Sea trees and Red Sea trees?" Mordin answered that he had only heard of Red Sea trees, because they were almost everywhere on Nefrit continent. The closer to the coast, the denser the planting. Penny had heard of Black Sea trees, though only in passing. "I heard that before the Nefrit continent began large-scale planting of Red Sea trees, they did indeed try growing Black Sea trees, but they were all uprooted before long and replaced with Red Sea trees. Currently, no one knows what functional differences exist between Black Sea trees and Red Sea trees." Saul ultimately accepted the tree seed. "Then thank you." "No need to thank me. Actually, I'm giving it to you because I see you researching these things, and the Black Sea tree seed won't be buried in your hands." Afterward, Justin bid farewell to Saul. "I have to go. Also, my coming to you for treatment was actually initially at Wind Sprite Payer's request." Saul was startled, surprised that Justin was also sent by Wind Sprite to test him, and equally puzzled that the other party would directly tell him the inside story. "But don't worry, I genuinely commissioned you to help treat my injuries. When I return, I'll tell Wind Sprite about the treatment. If there's anything you don't want me to reveal, I can also not mention it." After a brief surprise, Saul quickly regained his composure. He smiled and shook his head. "There's nothing unspeakable about my treatment process for you. However, why did Wind Sprite have you come? If she has any ideas, she could communicate directly with me." Having already treated someone, Saul wasn't afraid of others knowing his treatment process. He was just more curious about why Wind Sprite was so secretly and circuitously probing his strength. Justin said helplessly, "Actually, I'm not clear either. But when I last saw Wind Sprite, I noticed her mental power fluctuations were somewhat unstable. She probably has problems somewhere too." Justin told Saul everything he knew that he could share, then left Rhine Lake, saying he would return after some time with payment for the next phase of treatment. Though Justin's pollution situation was very complex, he was a big spender, so Saul naturally agreed happily. But no one expected that Justin would never again have the chance to ask Saul to treat him. Justin, whose physical ailments had greatly improved, used even less time than his arrival to reach the Whirlwind Mountains where Wind Sprite resided. When he entered the vicinity of the cliffs, his whereabouts were immediately reported to Wind Sprite by the people there. Wind Sprite almost immediately allowed Justin to enter her cave. Can that Saul really treat pollution? Are there no other side effects? Upon seeing Justin, Wind Sprite Payer immediately recovered from her mentally exhausted state and asked urgently. Justin respectfully bowed to Payer before answering. "Rather than treatment, it's more like absorption. He uses some unknown creature to absorb the pollution within our bodies." "Unknown creature, can you bring it over?" Justin shook his head. "During each treatment, I would stand in a massive magic array very far from him. That monster would only extend one tentacle each time, touching briefly then withdrawing. I never even clearly saw its full appearance, let alone capture it." Wind Sprite's eyeballs slowly turned, moving to the corner of her eye before driving her face and neck to follow. Though this was a beautiful face, such bizarre movement made it very uncomfortable to watch. "You lived at Rhine Lake for so long. Didn't you discover any traces of where the monster lives?" Justin recalled for a moment but ultimately shook his head. "No." Wind Sprite again slowly turned her head away. First the eyeballs moved, then driving the face, neck, and upper body. "Very perfunctory answer. Wind Sprite's voice began becoming ethereal and uncertain. Several wisps of breeze drifted to Justin's ears. He knew Wind Sprite was beginning to grow impatient. He frowned, about to explain again, when he heard Wind Sprite suddenly say, "Since you won't speak for yourself, I'll have to ask Lord Frym to examine you personally." Hearing Frym's name, Justin's face changed dramatically. He almost immediately turned to leave. However, just as he turned around, he collided with a ball of light. Justin's eyes revealed unconcealed terror as his mouth opened slightly. "How could you?" But before he could finish speaking, his thoughts suddenly cut off. This ball of light that had suddenly appeared entered his body. Justin's body immediately began smoking, with flames emerging from his slightly open mouth and wide eyes. The violently burning Justin emitted another person's voice. This voice was deep, authoritative, and filled with an inexplicably reassuring sense of composure. Interesting method. After Justin began burning, Wind Sprite kept staring at the corner of the wall, keeping her gaze away from him, as if afraid to look at that ball of light. Hearing that voice now, her entire body shuddered as she silently curled her toes. "He's establishing a magic reservoir, only lacking a carrier." The words "magic reservoir" made Wind Sprite's eyelids tremble lightly as she thought incredulously. The Purity Wizard Tower is actually preparing a magic reservoir, and it's almost complete. Though she tried hard to control her emotional fluctuations, she was still discovered immediately by the light ball. "Heh, want a magic reservoir? That makes sense. If you don't solve your fundamental problem, even if pollution is temporarily cleared, it will still continuously regenerate." Knowing that Lord Frym had already discovered her thoughts, Wind Sprite no longer concealed them. She closed her eyes and turned toward the light ball, bowing and pressing her forehead to the bed, assuming a posture of complete submission. "My lord, magic reservoirs are forbidden knowledge that shouldn't be mastered by a first-rank wizard. I want to kill Saul, recover the knowledge, and attempt advancement. Please grant permission." "Since it's forbidden knowledge, what qualifications do you have to know of it?" The light ball's merciless words made Wind Sprite's body stiffen, but it slowly added, "However, since it's an already built magic reservoir, you can take it and use it. As for that wizard called Saul, bring him back alive. I want to." The light ball's words suddenly stopped, and for the next 3 minutes, no sound emerged. Wind Sprite's mood, which had been elated because Frym permitted her to seize the magic reservoir, was suddenly cut short. She didn't know if Frym had suddenly changed his mind. This left her heart hanging neither up nor down, very uncomfortable. Fortunately, after 3 minutes, the light ball finally spoke again. "Stargate people are coming. Heh. Advance quickly and also find the Storm Eye as soon as possible." Before Wind Sprite could respond, the light ball's mental fluctuations suddenly disappeared. At this point, Justin had already turned into a charred black corpse, yet still stood upright. But Wind Sprite knew that what was most severely damaged within Justin was actually his brain. The light ball just now, Tribunal Chief Frym, had directly used the fastest and most violent method to crack Justin's consciousness body and read the memories within. After this, Justin's soul completely vanished from this world. After the light ball left, Wind Sprite didn't raise her head for a long time, until a man's voice came from outside the door. "Wind Sprite, has Lord Frym left?" Only then did Wind Sprite rise, lazily leaning against the cushion. Fine beads of sweat appeared all over her body, quickly carried away by the wind. "Gone." The door was ruthlessly ignited, rapidly turning to ash, yet didn't burn any other furniture. A tall, bald male wizard walked in. Unlike ordinary male wizards, he wore fluorescent yellow scale armor that made grinding sounds like pebbles when he walked. This person was one of the 3 third-rank wizards of the Borderland, Firefly Lord Herbert. He was expressionless as he walked to the far end of the room, looking down at Wind Sprite, whose expression was dazed and seemed to be spacing out again. What are Lord Frim's instructions? Wind Sprite didn't look at him, only saying indifferently, "What you need to know is just the instruction to find the Storm Eye quickly." Herbert's expression darkened slightly, then he put on a trace of mockery. "Then you'd better advance quickly." As soon as he finished speaking, his entire being suddenly scattered, transforming into countless fireflies. Then these fireflies dimmed like extinguished sparks and disappeared. Wind Sprite pressed her lips tightly together, a trace of resentment showing in her vacant eyes. Chapter 577, The Thief and the Mist-Form People. At the same time, Nefrit Continent. The Tribunal. The Central Building. Dawn Corridor. The passages within this corridor were more complex than a maze. Every 100 meters in the corridor's center, a slender, ornate yet darkly toned pillar would appear. At the top of these pillars sat human, head-sized spherical fire cages, with white flames gently licking the edges of the cages. They seemed completely capable of breaking free from the cage's restraint, yet remained willingly imprisoned. The pale light made the already dark-styled building even more terrifying. The architectural style within this corridor was unchanging. Walking inside gave one a helpless feeling of constantly repeating the past. If no one provided directions, intruders would be forever lost within, unable to escape even through death. Their souls would wander eternally within, becoming yet another wisp of green smoke in this dawn corridor. Each day in the dawn corridor, a judge would walk barefoot within, cloaked in black robes, responsible for receiving and conveying the tribunal chief's decrees. At this moment, white flames on one pillar suddenly surged. White tongues of fire pierced through the black fire cage, like several arms reaching toward the sky in prayer. The black-robed figure walking in the corridor immediately stopped upon seeing this scene, prostrating himself completely, hands clasped and placed before his knees, forehead pressed tightly against the backs of his hands. "Chief," he said respectfully. "Have you found him?" Frim's deep voice rang out. "Not yet. The person who infiltrated the Evernight Royal Palace is very cunning. After stealing the Red Sea tree source prepared for the coronation ceremony, he didn't flee but instead went to the palace and directly took half the blood from Alexandra's body. If we hadn't already made his heart symbiotic with the Red Sea tree to prevent Alexandra's accidental death, he probably would have. This person must be third rank. Investigate all third-rank wizards who recently entered the Evernight Empire." "Yes." He stole the tree source and took the Evernight royal blood. During the pauses in the tribunal chief's words, the black-robed figure maintained his prostrated position without change. And at precisely this time, Justin, the sole inheritor of the Black Sea tree source, suddenly appeared and sought treatment from a first-rank wizard. Yet Justin's memories contain no information related to the Black Sea tree source. Obviously, the memories were extracted before he came. Did he think Wind Sprite would kill him? Or had he already guessed I would appear through the large-scale Storm Eye search operations? Two tree sources having problems simultaneously. Could those rebels still not give up? Must they be satisfied only when this world is destroyed? The black-robed figure prostrate on the ground quietly listened to Frim's contemplation. He didn't deliberately try to memorize the content of these words. Even reaching fourth rank didn't make one omniscient. One might even have more questions from contacting more of this world's secrets. The black-robed figure was never interested in Superior's doubts. That would only make him live in extreme pain and die miserably. After a moment, the light source's voice stabilized again. "Send people to the Borderland entrance. The person who stole the Red Sea tree source will definitely go there next. Make sure to stop him outside." "Yes." The black-robed figure paused momentarily. "Chief, new purge orders have been issued. The numbers are quite large. Our manpower might not be very sufficient." Only tribunal wizards could view the purge order lists, and judgment executions all had time limits. If large numbers of tribunal wizards were sent to guard the borderland entrance, then purge order executions would be affected. The light source was silent for another moment before finally saying, "I will personally execute this purge order." The black-robed figure's entire body shook as he prostrated again, wishing he could press his head into the ground. Yes. There. Borderland Rhine Lake, Purity Wizard Tower. Saul was walking in the dark stairwell. Maybe I should also learn from my master and set up a row of white candles. Steward Hope followed behind him. The pipework within the walls has completed development. If you need it, I can complete the candlestick installation at any time. I don't particularly like those arms and mouths running around in the wizard tower. If you need it, they can naturally be confined to underground level 2. However, if I may say so, there will definitely be more people entering your wizard tower in the future. Installing some monitoring facilities within the wizard tower would be more convenient. Saul pressed his hand against the wall with its sandpaper-like texture. I don't plan to develop the wizard tower into a pseudo-academy organization like my mentors, but you're right. Even if it's just treating pollution, there will still be more wizards like Justin coming in. If we can't control their movements, it would be too troublesome and dangerous. Let's do as you suggest. First release the mouths, then have the eyes watch underground level 1 and the 3rd floor. Saul ultimately chose the same management approach as Gorsa. By the way, I once saw some mist-like human forms in my mentor's wizard tower. Hope, do you know what those are? Hope bowed slightly. Tower Master, those mist-formed people are byproducts of the wizard tower. They serve both as protection and early warning measures. When the wizard tower's resentful spirits increase, most will be absorbed by the pipework, but some residue remains, carrying the spirit's obsessions. They cannot communicate but instinctively gravitate toward areas with abnormal magical power and mental power fluctuations. You can check these mist-formed people's distribution on underground level 2. Through their distribution density, you can determine which areas have abnormalities. You have more experience in this area. Did you previously monitor these mist-formed people's distribution? Yes, sir. Saul increasingly felt this wizard tower steward was quite impressive. He not only had to manage every living person's daily needs, but also control every dead person's movements. Looking at the steward's humble yet elegant demeanor, Saul felt somewhat admiring. No wonder he could become the wizard tower's head steward. At the same time, he remembered when he had entered the curse gap in the 2nd storage room and seen the room's ceiling crawling with mist-formed people. At first glance, there were nearly 100. If one 2nd storage room had so many mist-formed people, how many did the entire wizard tower have? How many ordinary people and apprentices would have to die to form such a scale of mist-formed people in the wizard tower? He felt both shocked and curious. How many mist-formed people in one place indicates an abnormality? If a room has no abnormal fluctuations, there might only be 2 or 3 mist-formed people inside. If the number exceeds 10, it means someone is using 1st or 2nd rank magic or conducting equivalent level experiments. If it exceeds 30, it means someone is using 3rd rank magic or conducting uncontrollable experiments. Since 3rd rank and above magic might damage the wizard tower itself, we prohibit casting destructive 3rd rank and above magic within the wizard tower. Hearing the steward's answer, Saul felt somewhat confused. He asked hesitantly, what if a room has nearly 100 mist-formed people? This time it was the steward's turn to hesitate. Perhaps only large-scale experiments conducted personally by the tower master would have such an effect. Saul fell silent. His 2nd storage room seemed to always have nearly 100 mist-formed people wandering around. but he wasn't conducting dangerous experimental operations every time he hid in the gap to observe. Was it because the items stored in the second storage room itself were very dangerous, or because it was surrounded by eye monitoring and interlayer, causing these mist-form people to linger year-round? However, the steward responsible for monitoring mist-form people hadn't mentioned this point. Can you usually monitor the second storage room too? The second storage room has an interlayer. Normally, only the tower master can monitor it, and only the tower master can freely enter and exit without going through the bronze door. I see. Saul looked back at the steward and found he didn't seem curious about what was in the second storage room. Suddenly, the steward's left eye exploded violently. The explosion turned his entire left half-face into a hollow. Then tiny sparks automatically ignited on his face, rapidly spreading, about to burn away his entire head. Saul didn't hesitate, immediately transforming one hand into gray, semi-transparent tentacles, covering the steward's head. Those tiny sparks were immediately absorbed into Saul's tentacles, quickly extinguishing and becoming fine black ash. The steward's body swayed, and in the blink of an eye grew a new head. "Tower Master, there's bad news," the steward's new head spoke. Saul's expression darkened. "I know Justin is dead." Chapter 578, Abnormal Tranquility. When Saul thought Wind Sprite might continue testing him, he had suspected whether Justin might also be Wind Sprite's person. He just hadn't expected that in the end, Justin would confess himself. However, Saul could see that the other party wasn't Wind Sprite's subordinate. The two sides were more like a cooperative relationship. Regardless, since Wind Sprite had tested him repeatedly, Saul couldn't just sit and wait for death. While treating Justin, he had taken advantage of absorbing pollution to secretly plant an eye on the other party. An eye from the Wizard Tower's interlayers. The paired other eye was installed on the butler. Because the butler was currently the only person besides Saul who could somewhat control the resentful spirit fragments within the Wizard Tower. Moreover, spying on a third-rank wizard was very dangerous, and Hope was unwilling to let Saul take the risk personally. As a complete spiritual entity rooted in the Wizard Tower, it could recover as long as it didn't completely dissipate. Now it seemed his concerns were indeed justified. The opponent's power not only killed Justin, but even followed the eye's connection, and nearly killed the butler as well. "Did you see anything?" Saul waited for Hope to recover slightly before hurriedly asking. "Sorry, Tower Master, I saw nothing, only blinding light, followed by intense burning sensation." Saul was puzzled. Wind Sprite should be related to wind attributes. Why would there be light? It seems the flames just now were also caused by extremely strong light. There must be a wizard who specializes in light attributes on the other side. Saul was somewhat worried whether the opponent had discovered the eye he had hidden. Instead, the butler comforted him. "Please rest assured, Tower Master. They might have discovered there were soul fragments on Justin, but probably didn't discover the surveillance function. Otherwise, the power transmitted wouldn't have been just destructive without tracking." Saul relaxed slightly, but then said seriously, "Regardless of whether the opponent discovered it, we must accelerate the magic reservoir's progress." The butler nodded in agreement. The magic reservoir Saul was building had already taken initial shape. The quicksand termite colony had successfully recovered its vitality, and the queen had even begun regularly secreting obsidian crystals. This crystal was a relatively harmless catalyst. At the same time, Camus and the various consciousness bodies had also analyzed and improved the Monty extraction method and completed adaptation with the tower-top magic reservoir. Now, the most important thing was to select a carrier to filter magical power for the magic reservoir. And this carrier had to be a wizard. As for the choice of this wizard, it would be best to actively go out and search, since those who came to the door were very likely Wind Sprite's people. Killing too many such people would also be troublesome. So to collect enough true wizards, Saul once again began frequently venturing out, but using true wizards as filtering carriers. If outsiders knew, it would probably bring great trouble. To avoid becoming a public enemy of the borderland, Saul decided this trip's main purpose would be scavenging corpses. With the diary in hand, he could avoid many dangerous places. And this time, besides avoiding, he could also wait on the periphery. However, a month later, Saul returned completely empty-handed. Agu was carrying a pile of discarded parchment up to destroy it when he happened to meet the exhausted Saul, who had just returned on the stairs. "Master," he looked at Saul and inquired carefully, "was this outing not very smooth?" Saul took off his dust-covered outer robe and draped it over his arm. "Very strange." He shook his head while walking upward, his face full of confusion. "The atmosphere in the borderland recently has been very strange. Since having the plain body as an outer layer, consciousness bodies could act independently with minimal consumption. So to avoid delaying the magic reservoir's establishment, Saul had left several consciousness bodies skilled in research at the Wizard Tower to help. Consciousness bodies that couldn't independently cross Rhine Lake naturally couldn't go out either, and didn't know what was happening outside. Saul instructed Agu, "Tell the others to come to underground level 1 in half an hour." Agu quickly agreed. Half an hour later, Camus sat in the corner's confinement array, watching the suddenly lively underground level 1. Her gaze wandered bit by bit before finally settling on Saul at the center of the crowd. Saul was sharing his experiences from the past month with everyone. "I walked through all the dangerous areas near Rhine Lake, but not a single person appeared in these places recently." If it was just that no one died in the dangerous areas, Saul could understand, but if not a single person appeared, that was somewhat strange. In the borderland, often the more dangerous the area, the rarer the magic materials that could be obtained. Wizards who came to the borderland were either forced by circumstances or fond of adventure. In any case, they wouldn't just honestly stay in safe places. Yet Saul had spent a month walking through the areas around Rhine Lake and hadn't even found a single corpse to scavenge. This was too abnormal. Penny didn't care about abnormalities first. She was the first to run out and suggest, "Since we can't scavenge any, Brother Saul, let's just make our own." Several people unanimously ignored Penny's voice. Killing was easy, but wanting to stop after killing was difficult. Because one would fall into the intense pleasure of getting something for nothing, thus forgetting that the real purpose of pursuing benefits was pursuing knowledge. Putting the cart before the horse would only make the foundation unstable, even causing mutations. Maybe we should also find out if something major happened in the borderland that made ordinary wizards afraid to come out and adventure. Herman was relatively cautious. "Speaking of which, Jiajiagu hasn't appeared for a long time either. Could it be that we've been sealed off here?" Anne was relatively vigilant. "You mean we've been blockaded here?" Saul's fingers kept tapping the table, making disturbing sounds. "Since we want to know, why not just go out and see?" The old witch sat on her stool carelessly, completely unconcerned. The borderland experiences some major dangerous events every few years. It's normal for people to choose to keep low profiles and stay home during such times. For this kind of thing, just find some medium-sized settlements and you can basically inquire about it. "Good idea, then I'll trouble you with this," Saul immediately said sincerely. "I'm not going," the old witch refused outright. "Before I advance, I'm not going anywhere." Saul wasn't surprised either. The old witch still had bounties from Wind Sprite and Firefly Lord on her head. Even when helping him ambush people, she wouldn't stray far from Rhine Lake. but looking at the people around him, besides the old witch, there wasn't a single living wizard. Only Marsh, who could move freely, too weak. Going out would just make him a main course for someone's pot. Saul now finally understood why Master Gorsa, who clearly didn't like crowded places, still recruited so many apprentices. Many things really couldn't be completed by oneself alone. The efficiency was too low. Should I spend time inquiring about what happened here, or activate my second plan? After realizing Wind Sprite's covetousness toward his abilities, Saul had not only accelerated the magic reservoir's construction progress, but also begun preparing another escape plan. These two plans were offensive and defensive respectively, but neither was easy. There was no choice. Facing third rank, simple methods definitely wouldn't work. At this time, the butler walked down the stairs and knocked on the open door at the entrance. "Tower Master, sorry to interrupt. That headless knight from before has appeared in the mushroom forest again." Thud. Saul and the old witch stood up simultaneously, looking at each other. The old witch sneered. "Very good, the materials you want, haven't they just arrived?" Saul was also very excited. He had thought Brando was scared by his consciousness space and wouldn't return. Previously, when he first encountered someone who could escape from his consciousness space, he wasn't prepared and let Brando get away. But now he was different from a month ago. As long as Brando dared appear within the range covered by his mental fluctuations, he would definitely make this guy become a new page in his book. Chapter 579, Precious Leaks. Saul and the old witch arrived at the Wizard Tower exterior with great momentum. At the Rhine Lake shore, they saw the pseudo-melee wizard Brando, who had previously relied on his mount to charge straight into Rhine Lake, now carefully wandering in the mushroom forest. Every time he passed a mushroom tree, large amounts of spores would fly into the air as warnings. Clearly, the mushrooms here were still traumatized by this night wizard, who had previously rampaged through and destroyed many mushrooms. Finally seeing Saul, Brando immediately commanded the gallows beast forward, but stopped after seeing Saul and the old witch's expressions. "Please wait," Brando shouted loudly across half the lakeshore. "I've already discovered Langwin's corpse in a nearby valley and no, you didn't do it. So I came today mainly to apologize to you." "Apologize?" Saul didn't stop walking, his cloak fluttering behind him. "If my strength had been insufficient, I would have already died at your hands last time. Were you planning to apologize to my corpse or to the mushroom forest you destroyed?" Though the old witch was a head shorter than Saul, her speed wasn't slow either. She cackled maliciously and shouted, "I don't need your apology. Just let me kill you." Brando's expression under his helmet changed slightly, feeling somewhat troubled. The Saul and old witch across from him actually began running simultaneously. Brando's face changed, knowing these two had no intention of listening to him speak right now, so he could only turn to leave. But as soon as he turned around, he discovered that the originally sparse mushroom forest had suddenly become dense, as if they had grown legs, blocking his path. At the same time, several black tentacles emerged from underground. They didn't confront Brando head-on but focused on endless entanglement, maximally reducing his escape speed. To leave quickly, Brando couldn't care about offending Saul again and raised his spear to strike. But he hadn't expected that this time the mushroom forest blocking him couldn't be pierced. The mushroom body struck by the sharp spear tip caved in extremely softly, but when the spear tip was pulled out, Brando discovered there wasn't a single wound on it. It was like punching a sponge. In the distance, Marsh, hiding behind several mushrooms, chuckled maliciously. "Hee, for cutting my mushrooms, this is specially customized for you." Brando's eyes darted around, constantly searching for weaknesses in the mushroom forest. He possessed this violent body powerful enough to directly resist second-rank attacks, paying the price of being unable to cast other magic. However, Brando wasn't unprepared. He pulled out two black iron tubes from his chest, aimed them at the giant mushroom in front of him, and fired violently. Tremendous noise accompanied by firelight and black smoke. The mushroom in front of Brando was easily blasted with a large hole. Moreover, sparks were spreading around the hole's edge. This large hole almost penetrated the entire mushroom forest, causing the frantically running old witch to brake sharply. Is that gunpowder? No, judging by appearance, it should be gunpowder combined with magic. Saul didn't reduce his speed, but little Algie had already emerged behind him, ready to help Saul dodge quickly at any moment. Saul and the others were surprised by the weapon Brando produced, while Brando was also surprised by the mushroom's resistance. This fire thorn cannon originally had an ignition effect, but these mushrooms have too much moisture. Except for the pierced areas, other parts only turned slightly yellow and couldn't be ignited. Without turning around, Brando could already hear the sound of Saul stepping on the ice layer. From this series of arrangements, he had already sensed Saul's determination to capture him. If he was pulled into the consciousness platform again this time, he probably wouldn't get out so easily. The mushroom forest ahead was already beginning rapid recovery, even willing to overdraw its life force to delay him for a few more seconds. Brando knew well that even if he broke through the mushroom forest's encirclement at maximum speed, he absolutely couldn't maintain a safe distance from Saul before Saul ran out of Rhine Lake. And judging from his previous encounter with Saul, this Saul's spiritual body was quite powerful, likely not weaker than his own. Then his mental power's range of influence would definitely be very wide. Thinking of this, Brando made up his mind. He suddenly reached back and yanked his own head off his neck. The flesh at the neck that had just grown solid tore apart again. It still hurts. But Brando couldn't care about that now. He leaned back with his upper body and arms, then forcefully threw upward, actually hurling his own head out over the mushroom forest. This body with tremendous strength almost instantly threw his head to the distance, nearly beyond everyone's line of sight. And that wasn't all. An eagle with a human face suddenly descended from the sky, grabbed Brando's head, and immediately flew toward the sun. Saul had finally left Rhine Lake, but could only watch Brando's head disappear in shock. The fully armored body left on the ground crashed down after the head moved beyond a certain distance. Only then did the old witch catch up. She stood on her tiptoes, waving her fists at the sky. Running before even fighting, are you even a wizard? Saul shook his head. He had been so close just now. Maybe he really should capture a flying magical creature as transportation. Though one couldn't rely on magic to fly over Rhine Lake, creatures using their own bodily characteristics to fly were still fine. Perhaps I could make a glider myself. As long as I take off from the wizard tower, even if I lose magical power over the lake's surface, I could easily cross Rhine Lake. Saul looked back at the huge circular platform atop the wizard tower. Though the area is a bit small and the distance a bit short, I can use magic to solve that. He got away again. I'm afraid he won't come back next time. The old witch was very disappointed. We prepared traps to prevent his escape, but he also came prepared. Throwing his head and the human-faced eagle in the sky obviously weren't spur-of-the-moment decisions. Actually, Saul had been just a hair's breadth from catching Brando. If the opponent hadn't abandoned his body so decisively, Saul definitely had confidence to forcibly pull him into the consciousness platform before he escaped his spiritual body's control range. As long as he trapped Brando's consciousness for half a minute, the old witch could take the opportunity to directly kill Brando's head. I bragged too much. Saul touched his cheek, feeling somewhat embarrassed. He glanced at the old witch still cursing at the sky and thought, indeed, most wizards in the borderlands still have brains. They're not so easy to deal with. Although he still hadn't managed to catch Brando this time, Saul had inadvertently obtained exactly what he urgently needed. He stepped forward to pick up Brando's body, carefully examining it to confirm this was indeed a second-rank wizard's body, then was overjoyed. Though missing the head, it didn't affect its function as a filtering carrier for the magic reservoir. Such a filtering carrier was much stronger than multiple first-rank wizard corpses. If he could leave behind such a body every time he comes, I wouldn't mind letting him leave next time either. Saul carried Brando's body, looking toward where he had departed. Now Saul no longer considered Brando an enemy. With proper planning, this could be an inexhaustible source of leaks. The Priceless Kind. Chapter 580, Opening the Chaos Realm. Unexpectedly obtaining a second-rank wizard's body, Saul finally didn't need to venture out to gather information and rely on luck to scavenge corpses for the time being. After calming everyone down, they immediately began constructing the final components of the magic reservoir. Of course, transforming a corpse into a carrier capable of filtering magical power also required various processing methods and time to settle. During breaks from experiments, Saul simultaneously initiated his second plan. That was to find an escape route that others would never expect. This escape route was the Chaos Realm compass he had obtained from Sander at Blue Water Bay. Saul had unexpectedly acquired Sander's ancestral Chaos Realm compass, and it was even specifically mentioned by the diary, making him immediately realize this item was extraordinary. Especially the word realm suggested that behind this compass there might be a world side, or even an independent small world. Saul didn't dare hope for a major world. Looking at the compass's construction, it probably couldn't achieve such high transmission efficiency either. Subsequently, he took out the crying laughing face gold coins that had previously caused the Chaos Realm compass to react. The crying laughing face gold coins had the magical power to transfer positions, related to spatial magic. If the Chaos Realm compass could truly open a small world, it must be related to spatial magic. These two items together might very well spark something. Of course, to prevent the sparks from becoming explosive bombs, Saul didn't test in the Wizard Tower. Instead, he took the Chaos Realm compass and gold coins, crossed Rhine Lake, and came to a small hillside in the distance. Agu and the others are all in the Wizard Tower, but Morden and Penny are still in the diary. Little Algie is also. Well, that's enough. Besides, the diary didn't give any death warnings either. He even suspected the diary was encouraging him to explore the Chaos Realm compass. Otherwise, it wouldn't have prompted him about the compass's function the moment he obtained it. Then, let's do a simple verification first. Saul first took out a crying laughing face gold coin and lightly tossed it in his hand. The originally motionless compass needle suddenly trembled. Saul, whose eyes were fixed intently on the compass, naturally didn't miss this change. He activated the gold coin with his mental power and immediately sensed the other gold coin beside his hand. Now, as long as he activated the coin's power, he could immediately transfer to the other gold coin's location. Of course, if he actually performed the transfer now, it would be no different from jumping in place. Saul continued sensing changes in the compass but found that except for the initial needle tremor, there was no further movement. Saul tried activating the other gold coin, which again only made the Chaos Realm compass tremor once. Maybe the mechanism is on the compass itself. Saul picked up the compass and examined it carefully. This time, it didn't take long before he discovered the compass's back could be opened. After opening the rear shell, there was actually a circular groove inside. He compared the gold coin to it, and found this groove could perfectly hold 2 gold coins. A strong sense of déjà vu arose spontaneously. This are the gold coins' batteries, then are their positive and negative poles. Saul tried several placement methods and finally discovered that when he placed both gold coins with their crying faces down in the groove, the compass needle suddenly began rotating at a steady speed. Saul closed the back cover and tentatively extended his mental power into the compass's interior. The next second, he and the compass completely disappeared from the spot. Because he deliberately concealed this, and with Anne and other consciousness bodies' cooperation, the old witch didn't notice the anomaly. But Camus on the wizard tower's underground level 1 suddenly turned her head toward the direction where Saul disappeared, showing some confusion on her face. Their spatial array transmission could make people dizzy, but the Chaos Realm Compass's transmission didn't make Saul feel much discomfort. However, when Saul regained his footing, his legs still went weak, and he collapsed to the ground in a forward-bent posture. He lowered his head, breathing heavily. Though he didn't feel suffocated, he was still very uncomfortable. Although Saul felt like a fish out of water at this moment, he wasn't actually lacking oxygen. What made him feel extremely uncomfortable was that there was no magical power in the air here. Not even a bit. Saul knelt on the ground, pressing his hands against the gray-black compacted earth. But when he contracted his fingers due to discomfort, the seemingly hard ground was immediately crushed to powder. After Saul slowly adapted to the environment here, looking beneath him, what had been compacted earth had completely turned into sandy ground. He pinched this sandy soil with his fingers, and it instantly became even finer powder. Saul slowly changed from crawling to sitting, breathing heavily as he observed the surrounding scenery. This place had no magical power, but it wasn't like the technologically advanced world of his previous life either. As far as the eye could see, everything was desolate. The world overall presented a grayish-dark tone, as if entering a black, white, and gray space. Fine black particles also floated in the air. Saul raised his hand and waved it in the air a few times. Before long, his hand was covered with quite a bit of black dust. He gently rubbed with his finger in his palm, and the black powder also became fine dust. The same texture as the earth here. This should be an abandoned world. At least this corner is. I can't see a single normal plant in this vicinity, mostly just clods and mounds of earth that crumble at the touch. Although Saul studied the Chaos Realm Compass to find a hiding place for himself and everyone in the Wizard Tower, seeing such desolation here was still somewhat disappointing. He had fantasized about carrying a resource-rich small world with him. Never mind, let's first check the return method and whether positions can be transferred. Saul looked down at the Chaos Realm Compass in his hand. The compass needle was still slowly rotating. Saul injected mental power again, just like when he came. But the Chaos Realm Compass's feedback was that it needed cooldown time. Spatial traversal cannot be performed continuously. Well, this was within my expectations. I just don't know how long it takes. If the time is too long. No, if I stay here for a long time, then when I return it will definitely delay the magic reservoir's progress, and the diary should warn me. Moreover, judging by the compass's reaction, the cooldown time shouldn't be too long. Saul considered whether to stay in place, waiting for the compass to cool down or venture out, to explore this unknown space. He found that neither plan triggered the diary's opposition. I'll leave a mental power coordinate and go take a look. Saul stood up, patting the soil stuck to his body. Before the sandy soil behind him gradually expanded into a mass of gray mist, he quickly left the spot. Because looking around, the 4 directions had only slightly different terrain. Everything else was the same black earth and black dust. Saul randomly chose a direction and walked away from his coordinate for an hour, but the scenery before him still showed no change. He looked down to reassess the Chaos Realm compass's recovery progress. The results were encouraging. From this hour's changes, it should only take 1 to 2 days to return. Putting away the compass, Saul continued moving in his chosen direction. Without active elemental particles in the air, magical power couldn't be replenished. Even a wizard's body wasn't as strong as in the original world. Saul walked intermittently. After a full day, he hadn't traveled very far. At least what lay ahead was still barren soil and black mist. The compass was about to finish cooling down, but Saul hadn't encountered a single living person or creature in this place. After walking for a day without reaching an end, this place doesn't seem to be the smallest type of world fragment or world side. It should be a complete small world. However, a terrible disaster occurred here, causing the entire world to become this lifeless appearance. Maybe I'm the only living person currently existing in this world. However, just as he said this, the sandy soil beneath Saul's feet suddenly trembled. Then a purple-black soft fleshy tendril suddenly emerged from beneath his feet, wrapped around Saul's right leg, and yanked downward. Saul immediately became a head shorter, as his right leg was buried up to the thigh. A monster, Saul's eyes lit up. Finally something alive.